All right, I will now call to order the City of Sherwood Budget Committee meeting for May 11, 2017. Katie, will you please do the roll call?
Chair Andy McConnell,
Here.
Vice Chair Mirta Meyer,
Here.
Susan Claus,
Here.
Andy Jensen.
Here.
Amy Kutsky is absent today. Paul Mayer.
Here.
Kurt Studer appears to be absent. Mayor Clark.
Here.
Council President Harris.
Here.
Councilor Young.
Here.
Councilor Garland.
Here.
Councilor King is absent today. Councilor Kuiper.
Here.
And Councilor Robinson.
Here.
And Kurt is here.
And Kurt is here.
Very good, we have a quorum. Tonight's meeting will be a working and listening session with line-by-line detail. Towards the end of tonight's meeting, we will have a public hearing on state shared revenue. We will also have time for the general public comment as the last item on our agenda. If you wish to speak, please fill out the public comment form and give it to the Finance Administrative Assistant. The committee chair will recognize those persons wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed through the committee chair. If a motion is made to vote on an issue, please wait until the motion is seconded and then call for discussion on the motion. After discussion, call for a vote. Oh, that's instructions to me. After discussion, I will call for a vote, and by having all in favor say aye and call for all opposed. The next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes for February 16 of 2017 and November 16 of 2016 of the Sherwood Budget Committee minutes. Those have been sent out to everyone prior to for review, and they're in the packet for tonight's agenda. I will entertain motions to approve the minutes.
Move that we approve the minutes.
Councilor Harris moves we approve the minutes. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The minutes are approved. Thank you very much. Now on to new business. The first item of business is the election of the committee chair. Katie, I will turn this over to you.
Per ORS 294.419, Section 9, the Budget Committee is required to elect the presiding officer at the first meeting when the budget message is delivered, which is this evening. I would like to request that Chair McConnell open the floor for nominations for the chair position for the fiscal year 2017-2018 budget cycle. I will ask that you please refrain from voting until all nominations have been received, so that we can handle this in a quick and orderly fashion. Chair McConnell?
Very good. I will now open the floor for nominations for chair of this committee. Are there any nominations?
I nominate Sean Garland.
Nomination for Sean Garland.
I nominate Mirta Meyer.
Nomination for Mirta Meyer. Are there any other nominations?
Can I ask a point of order? Does this committee, does the chairman have to be from the citizenry, or can it be from either the council or the citizen?
Traditionally, the chair has been on the citizenry just to keep things a little more balanced, but I don't believe that there's a
I don't believe there's a requirement. I think the practice has always been a citizen usually is selected as chair.
But there's not a hard rule?
But there's not a
Okay.
hard rule.
Okay.
Are there any other nominations? I will now close the floor for nominations and call for a vote. Since there are two, I think we should call for a vote by show of hands to make sure the count is accurate. We could find out if they want to do it. Do the nominees reject being nominated? There are no objections by the nominees.
Someone might have rejected last time around. Yes, I recall that.
I did. That's
All right, so I will entertain the first nomination first. All those in favor of Sean Garland as committee chair, please raise your hand. There's one. All right. All those in favor of Mirta Meyer, please raise your hand.
No offense, Sean.
How many was that? The rest? Are there any opposed to either? Any opposed to either? The election is complete. It's Mirta Meyer will be the chair.
Are you supposed to get a count for each person opposed and?
Were there any I asked for oppositions. Were there any oppositions to either candidate? None opposed.
Just a landslide for Mirta.
Just-
so.
It's Mirta by 7. All right. So as of this moment, does that mean the chair transfers to?
That's correct. We will be
Meyer?
providing.
That was fast.
Yeah, there's no break-in period.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
And then I would like to request that Chair Mirta Meyer open the floor for nominations for vice chair.
Oh, well, I would like to open the floor for nominations for vice chair.
I nominate Andy McConnell.
I'll nominate Sean Barley. Nice, so one from each.
Anyone else interested in making a nomination? Okay, I'm happy to open the floor for vote. Unless anyone, yeah,
My term does end at the end of June, so I may not be the best choice for vice chair for the next year.
so are you declining the nomination?
I am declining the nomination.
Then
But thank
yes. Then I nominate Paul Meyer.
Meyer, Meyer. Okay,
kinda
do
love
you
that,
accept the
Meyer, Meyer.
nomination? Okay. Well, then let us take a vote. All in favor of Sean being the vice chair, please raise your hand.
Paul!
And all in favor of Paul, please raise your hand. Vote for Sean.
Oh, are we, this is
Hysterical.
no offense, Sean.
None taken.
5 to 6.
Yeah, I
did
I just think
I
it should
just
be
thought it would be
citizen.
nice to have one of each.
Okay, well, I don't know what the count turned.
6-5.
Okay, well, thank you, both.
So it's Meyer and Meyer.
Meyer and Meyer.
Oh, no.
Is it Meyer and Mayor?
Mayor.
Oh, there you go. So now you all must
Meyer and
pronounce
Meyer.
my name
Mayor.
properly.
Yeah.
Well, thank goodness your first name is not Mirta. Boy, that would be fun. So, as Andy mentioned, I don't need to review meeting rules at this point? No? Okay. So, what's next?
So you let us know which item on the agenda we're moving on to, and then turn it over to the city manager.
Perfect. Okay. We have approved our minutes, and we have nominated. And Joe, would you kindly begin your overview?
So, like previous years, when I release the budget, in the budget document is the budget message, which is largely a budget overview. I hope you've had the opportunity to read it and think about it. I am not going to regurgitate and read it for you, because I try to get you as much information ahead of time as possible. And we supplemented that information as well with a couple other additional pieces. So unless there is a request to go over the budget as an overview, I'd really prefer that we, just like we did last year, dive into the line item detail, explain what is here in terms of the information, and then just go department by department and explain, what's in each department's budget, what's different from previous years, and answer questions. I think that was the most valuable last year, so. Is that okay with everybody? So if you go to the back of your folder, so, Chair, we're skipping down kind of to item E already.
Okay.
We may go back to some of the documents that we provided if people have questions at one point. But if we go to page 1 of 41, and this is going to be a combination between Katie and I. So as you know, this is Katie's first budget for the city of Sherwood. And she brings a wealth of experience in Washington and other places, but every jurisdiction does budgeting a little differently, so. She's done a great job, kind of on the fly, learning how we do things and things like that, so.
Joe, can I just ask you, tell me the page number where you are?
Page 1 of 41, which is in the section called line item detail. All the way in the back.
So Joe, is this a combination, this packet, combination of you, Katie, and others that who put
It
this
is a
together?
group effort. So it is my proposed budget, but I am not the one that puts it together
Did all the
solely.
writing and,
This process for some of the newer members of the Budget Committee, this process starts back in January. And each department director puts together their own respective department requests. It all gets submitted into the finance director and myself, and we go through a series of adjusting things because if everybody got what they wanted, we would not have a balanced budget. So the process starts with the directors, they make their requests, they sit down with Katie and I, we go through what those requests are, and then we go through an effort to balance the budget. And you will hear this in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and I've said this before. You have a policy that we live within the revenues that we are projecting to bring in. So we live within the budget, so we have to balance that first. So whatever we identify or project as operating revenues, that's the number we have to be balanced. And we balanced by how much? A whopping
1,000 something.
1,000 something dollars.
1,075.
So it is a balanced budget, which I'm responsible for putting together. If you start making changes as a committee and saying we need to spend more money over here, then then we got the task of balancing things. And that's a process that we spent a good 4 to 5 weeks getting balanced. Then once we balance the budget, another set of requests that are usually submitted are one-time requests. And we look at our fund balance to see how much is available to actually do that one-time request list. And probably close to $1 million in requests.
cut?
Well, probably $1 million was cut.
Yeah.
And we'll get to this point. I kind of want to go through each department's specific budgets, have the directors answer questions, and then we'll get to the list of things that I said no to live within that 20% rule that you guys have set, that we need at least 20% in the general fund in terms of our fund balance. There's things on that list that I'm sure you're going to say, well, we need to do that. And I anticipate some debate and discussion about, should we dip below that 20%? What are the pros and cons of that? What's the risks of doing that? I felt very strongly, and I told this to my team, is you guys have set the policy, or the council set the policy, that there's a 20%, we're going to maintain a 20% of operating revenues fund balance. I didn't feel that it was my right as the city manager to present a budget that dipped below that, because it's your policy. And if you as a committee decide, well, we're going to take a risk and we're going to eat into some of those because those projects are important to do now and not deferring those, that's a debate or discussion you guys should have, not necessarily myself as a city manager.
Isn't that a policy decision by the city council?
It is a policy decision that's set by the city council, but the budget committee could, as a committee, decide to do that. The council would have the final say in June when you adopt the budget.
And
So,
just a reminder that the policy says that we will strive for 20% and we'll maintain over 10%. So the policy isn't that it will stay over 20%. So there's no issue of going against the policy. It's a goal
Yeah.
that council has set.
When is that? Is that,
oh, that's been here since
Been a
I've
long
been
time, huh?
here.
Yeah.
It's been here this is my 5th year. So.
yeah, okay.
And for some of the folks that may remember, it wasn't too long ago that we had about 5 to 10% in our fund balance. So we've built that up over the years, and I think,
Was it that low in the last?
no,
oh,
not
okay,
while I was
prior
here.
to you?
But prior, I think in the period prior to when I got here, the 5-year period, it was as low as 5 to 10%, which is way too low. So we will get to that discussion at a later point, so. So I'm going to start just kind of giving a general overview. I always encourage questions from you. You have in this information 3 years of actual numbers. The adopted budget for the current fiscal year, the projected year end for this fiscal year, which is June 30th, and then the last column is the fiscal year 17-18 proposed budget. So you have a lot of information and all the line item detail. You got this last year, and I think everything I heard from the committee is that you Really liked having the level of detail that we provided versus years ago where everything was kind of summarized and you really didn't know where and how we spent money respectfully throughout the organization. So you got a lot more information, and I think it leads to some good questions and good conversation. So, do you want to reiterate about their line, what they can change, or you want to hold off on that? Because that was in one of your memos.
It was in the memo that is part of your packet. And so it's just a reminder that we give you all of these line item details. And we do that in order to promote discussion and so that you have a clear understanding of what's going into the numbers. But when you're approving the budget, you're not approving it at that level. You're approving it at a much higher level. And on the very last page of your packet, it has the levels of authority. Or it discusses the levels of authority. And if you look on page 22 in your binders, there is a table that clearly shows what those levels of authority are. So I didn't spell it out again in the memo, but the basic idea for the general fund is that it is at the division level. So you get this information at the department level, but you're adopting it at the division level. So you'll see the city manager, for example, and the city recorder and council and finance all separate in here, but when we adopt, they're all lumped into administration.
Okay, so if we go back to page 1, the first few pages of the line item detail is the total general fund. So you get a kind of comprehensive look, and this is what we're going to focus on tonight is general fund. In terms of all the revenues lumped together, it's not segregated by, well, these are planning fees or these are fees that come in from court and things like that. We'll get to that level of detail. So this is generally an overview, and you can get a sense of what we are projecting both for revenue and what we are projecting for expenses. So at the top of page 1, everyone wants to look, how are property taxes? What do property taxes look like? And what you will see, if you look at line 4010, in the current year, we projected 5.174 million in property taxes, and we're projecting actually be almost right on at 5.175, and we're bumping that projection up for next year to 5.4, which is a pretty nice, actually, increase year to year. You will see back in 15-16, a pretty big bump from 4.6 in 14-15 to 5.3. That's the URA issue where we didn't charge enough in URA, so we got a temporary bump in the property tax revenue. Now that's kind of come back down. So that's an artificial spike just for that 1 year. So overall, property taxes are up or projected to be up close to about $300,000, which is pretty healthy growth year to year. Of course, as I said in my budget message, the $350,000 hit overall to PERS just ate all that property tax growth, wiped that right away, just in that category.
And that's mostly new property coming on, or is it from the increase?
It's mainly, there's a 3% increase that we have just annually, and then we're projecting a moderate 2% growth. We aren't going to see the large growth for a couple more years. There's not a lot of development in property taxes that we're looking at for next year's tax rolls.
Yeah, as we talk about the future, with all the construction on the horizon and a lot of commercial and industrial growth in the next few years, you'll see that spike 3 to 5 years from now when those properties actually get built and they get on the tax rolls. We're feeling pretty robust about how that's going to affect our property taxes. But that's still 2 or 3 years out. And that's assuming all those projects actually come to fruition. Sometimes they don't. And when Julia comes up and talks about community development, we'll talk about projects that we thought were coming in that didn't, and then projects that we didn't think were coming in and that are coming in, and timing and all that kind of stuff. So, franchise fees, if you look at that, that's pretty stable growth. 1.8 million overall this year. We're bumping it up to 1.9 million for next year. That's an important revenue source for the city. in terms of revenue for the general fund. Intergovernmental is pretty much flat, 1.8. 7 is being projected, we're bumping that up to 1.89. So there's a little bit of growth in that category. Charges for services, so a lot of these are land use fees and other kind of things. So if you go to page 2, at the top, in that category is actually overall a pretty nice jump from 1.4 in the current budget to 1.5 next year.
Joe, can you speak to the decrease in collection of the rent of buildings and facilities?
What line number?
It's 4384.
I'll be happy to speak to that.
Yes, go ahead.
That has to do with the ending of the payment from the YMCA for the, their portion of the loan was actually a rent, and that contract is ending, and so we won't be receiving that. And in the same token, we also don't have the payment on the debt, so they offset each other.
So is the proposed revenue based on rent through October?
So no, they no longer pay any, the
They're
YMCA no
done.
longer pays any
Okay.
rent. So this is the remaining facilities that are rented out, the
Okay.
donut shop and the tenant facilities that's being improved over at the Art Center.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a large decrease.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Can we go back 1 minute to the
Again,
intergovernmental? Where I don't see anything on here for the marijuana sale in here. Is
We
that
don't
it? Yes,
use
this
marijuana.
budget? Will that be next year?
we won't receive marijuana.
We voted it down.
Citizens voted that down. So cities that have opted out for recreational facilities currently do not receive any revenues.
So there's nothing for the medical marijuana.
There is and the council knows about this, but others may not, there is a petition that's starting to get that question back on the ballot, possibly in November of this year, to ask voters once again whether or not to allow recreational marijuana. But they have to collect the signatures and get on the ballot and all that stuff, so that question may be coming back.
What kind of revenue could that potentially look like for the city? Has there been any?
It's based on, had it pulled up here just in case. Oh, it's a question mark in the report from the state saying basically that we don't know exactly
Right.
what would happen. It would depend on the number of licenses, it appears.
Yeah.
So the number that were issued in the city, and then they distribute the total. So it's a question mark on the state's reports.
Would we only see the 3%? If we went with the 3% again, that's all we would see was 3%? Okay.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
one of the things we can do is some of our neighbors actually do have those facilities, and they have budgets projecting revenues for next year. We can do a little research and see what other cities, neighboring cities are projecting for revenues. It's not huge.
Yeah.
My guess is it's gonna be probably in the 50,000 or less range. I mean, it's not gonna be hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I just want to go through these real quick, and then we'll get into specifics in the departments. So, fines and forfeitures, a little bit of an increase compared to the current year. Most of that is
Red flags.
red flags and traffic citations. Interest, actually, is not a huge dollar, but it's almost doubling, so
There's been a huge increase in interest rates. We've gone from receiving virtually nothing to, it's just about doubled the amount that we're receiving per month from the beginning of this year to now. It's starting to really climb. So we're not projecting that it will continue to climb significantly, but we are projecting that it will remain at the higher rate that it is.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit about the transfers in and other sources?
Sure. So those relate to fleet payments. They relate to payments from the other departments into our fleet. So the fleet has been moved into the general fund. In reviewing all of the way that they were calculated, I found some areas that I had some concerns with, and we're reviewing how we're going to allocate those payments to make sure that they are based on actual activity as opposed to based on budget, so that the departments that truly use the most tires and fuel and all of that are paying for it. And so I'll actually be meeting next week with Public Works to go over that. These are the preliminary estimates based on how much we think they will use. There's a chance those could need to be adjusted as we go through the project of reallocating, but that there's purely for fleet.
Okay, thank you.
So we presented this in the last report in a graph, but if you notice just revenue, if we're focusing on revenue, we projected in the current year to be 11.6 million, and we're actually only going to receive 11.5 million. So we're not receiving the revenues, we are projecting that we're not going to receive the revenues that we budgeted for the current year. We're also not spending what we budgeted for the current year. So they go hand in hand. So any questions on this kind of overall summary? I think when we get into specific departments, you'll see where that variation is, especially as we move on. So if you go over to page 3 on the expenditure side, same things. We're taking all the departments in the general fund and collapsing it. You'll notice in personal services, that first line 6011, we have a budget this year of 5.8 million for salaries and wages. Next year is slightly over 6 million. Can you talk a little bit of why that's not as much as maybe one would anticipate with COLAs and other kind of things?
So we've removed one position, or not filled a position that was left vacant in the court to have some savings. We did have an additional position that was proposed, which has to do with the senior center, in order to staff that. So in order to alleviate any significant increase in salaries, we did leave that other position vacant. So this is purely representing a 1.6% COLA, and then those tiny adjustments for the differing positions, but very little change in personnel is proposed.
So the big line item, if you go down to 6031 PERS, you can see in the general fund, we go from the current year's budget of 1.19 to 1.46. That's a pretty big increase. Again, if you're comparing back to that property tax increase, that pretty much is a wash, just in that line item.
And as we go through the rest of the budget review, we're gonna see similar adjustments up to PERS for pretty much all the
Yeah, and
departments
this
that have
summarize,
personnel.
this collapses it all together. And again, this is just general fund. We have PERS costs that are in the enterprise funds and others, but this is the biggest component of where the PERS hit is.
So what's our dollar amount that we're increasing the budget that covers the 1.6% increase for our wages? What's just the dollar amount across the board?
For the, let me get to the right screen here, sorry. And if we can move on to one other question, it'll just take me a minute to pull it up here.
Any
So-
other questions on those, on the personal services, any of those line items?
The health, we've also, we're projecting a 5% increase on the health benefits also. And that's just purely an increase in the costs, right?
In the charge to us from the insurance. I can't give you the pure 1.6% because each person is allocated based on their step increases, based on the date that they started, based on the COLA. So they're not split. I don't have them split out. I have each person's calculated.
We can come
Actually, I
back with
can
that.
run with it, yeah.
Yeah, if you could, I mean, so the net effect, when we say we're giving all of the staff 1.6% across the board, and that's what we're proposing. It's all of the staff, there's not anybody accepted out of it, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so whatever that dollar amount of that 1.6% increase, because that's one increase that we have with staff. We have a 5% increase with the health. That's another chunk. Then we've got another chunk on the PERS increase. So those increases that are associated with our staffing, what that total dollar impact is to the budget. Yeah. And so it's not just split out between the general fund and then across the funds, just, you know, what our typical citizen's gonna say to us, what does that actually mean to the overall budget? So that'd be great.
If there are no further questions, material and services, I want to highlight 6209, which is the training line. You'll see, and I alluded to this in the documents that we sent to you, our current year's budget in the general fund is $129,000. My projected budget next year is more than half cut, down to $60,965. So when we get to the respective departments, you may be interested, okay, I see a big cut in your training budget. What does that mean to your staff and what kind of training, things like that? I think the directors are prepared to talk about that and explain that, so. But that's one of the ways we balance the budget, is by cutting training.
And that may be something that, as a committee, we'd like to discuss for the next fiscal year.
And in that reduction, did you just do like a across-the-board reduction per? Okay, so you went in and said,
So philosophically, I'm not necessarily a person that does this across the board. Everybody's the same. So I told my directors to take a look at their training requirements. The one caveat I said is if it's a certification, if it's a training that's required for a license or certification, I'm not interested in you cutting that because that's important for people's jobs. But if it's anything else, take a look at your training. Out-of-state training, overnight training is the kind of stuff that I ask folks to basically eliminate. So they brought back kind of a revised budget with their cuts. We talked through what those impacts are, and then, you know, I basically agreed or changed it. I'm not an across-the-board guy. I know that some folks cut your budget 10% across the board. I don't believe in that. I think there's some thought and some time that goes in and take a look at your training and what can you live without. And I think the department directors did a good job to identify those. But they're anticipating you may have questions as we talk to them about that, so.
So Joe, you mentioned travel and expenses related to travel off-site. Is that rolled up into that line?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I knew what was in that line.
Yeah, there's one little thing I asked Katie, I was like, what is this $120 in 6211, transportation for training and conference? And she said, that's one that should have got rolled up
It
into.
should have gotten rolled in.
Yeah, that shouldn't be a line in there. Because everyone else's transportation is rolled up into that 6209 number.
Got it. Thank you.
I do have
Counselor
an
Robinson.
answer. Oh, sorry.
I have 4 quick questions on page 3. 6102, engineering and architectural, professional and technical services, jumped up 55 to 70,000 in the proposed budget. Do you know what that is a result of?
So community development will have much more specifics on that. That's all related to the expansion. Most of it's related to the school district, to the new school. But they can speak more specifically, but that's what that's for.
What's an air card?
So that laptops or Surface Pros can run in areas where there isn't Wi-Fi.
And the increase in 6208 printing and advertising, is that primarily associated with the comp plan update?
The increase?
Yeah, it goes to 77.4.
It goes 11,000 over what we've done now and 22,000 from budget last year.
No, it's not related to the comp plan, but I will get back to you on that.
And when the department directors, you'll see the same numbers, let's look and see who's bumped up. It could be a combination of across the board or just in one area? So it's a good question.
So your answer will probably be the same on my 6217 question, software, hardware licensing fees, triple.
So when we get to the IT department, we have specifics on all of the software and licensing fees. I do have an answer on the personnel question that Susan asked regarding the change due to the COLA increase. So the increase in just salaries for the citywide was $113,675. The increased salaries and benefits is $152,702.
Does that include PERS and health?
That includes PERS and health, because PERS is a percentage, so the 1.6% increases the amount of PERS. So that takes into account everything that's affected by the COLA,
So that second
but
number,
just the effect that the COLA has on that.
okay, you said the second number was
152,702. And those are citywide numbers. I can also give you general fund if you'd like that breakdown too.
So are you saying that the, let me just, I think I see what you're saying here. That because of the 1.6%, that the, not only do the staff wages go up, but we have the benefits then go up another 39,000?
Correct, because
Associated with
FICA
it.
goes up and workers' comp goes up and PERS goes up. All of these are a percentage of the salary, so when the salary increases, all of those have to increase as well.
So if there was no 1.6%, then it would be a total of 153,000?
That's correct.
Okay, okay.
Okay, if you turn the page to page 4, when I'm looking at the summary lines, if you have specific questions on line items, please ask as you're doing. So facilities and equipment is pretty flat, not much of a change in the proposed budget compared to the current years. Our supplies, total supplies in the general fund is actually a cut from the current year, from 437 down to 385. Minor equipment is also a cut, 202 down to 92,000. Community activities is a cut from 53,000 in the current year's budget down to 26,900.
Joe, on the, where you're talking about the minor equipment, the computer, is it because we've completed that purchase, and that's why we're having the cut, we don't have the need?
So the
Or,
big change there is in, well, actually 6503 and 6504 are cut, so.
So I looked up the detail on those, and we had a large amount in the current year that we won't have next year. We had a server replacement. We had replacement of multiple computers, that was about $15,000 for that. And then we had security equipment of $20,000. That's on the 6503 side. And then the 6504, endpoint security, which my understanding is that that's a virus software. I may be wrong, but that's my understanding. And then SEIM software, Brad would have to talk about what that is, but that was another 15,000. And then auditing software, which is 10,000. And Brad can give more details on that, but those are the reasons that those two lines, the main reason.
okay, but we're not cutting services, we made purchases that we don't have to make.
We make them and then they roll into the software the annual licensing. So there was the question earlier about the licensing fees going up. So one year we make the purchase and the next year then we have to just renew the licenses and
And licenses are
software.
less,
So-
obviously, than the original.
so that's why
purchase.
they shift categories over time.
Yeah, so it's not that we're cutting the service,
No, no.
we didn't need that additional,
Correct.
so it's not really a cut, it's just, we're not,
When I say cut, what I'm proposing is less than the current year. That's all
Okay.
I'm saying.
okay.
So, just to give you a sense year to year, so. Sally?
6307, regular phone service and long distance. doubles, more than doubles?
It doubles from the budget because there was an error in the budget. So when I first came on, was looking at what things are charged and what the budget was, and nobody's been able to tell me why. The budget was half of what it should have been, and it happens sometimes.
Okay, what about 6313? Repair and maintenance for grounds went up by 100,000, almost.
And Craig will speak to that more specifically. It's not,
Isn't that the new turf field?
Maybe.
Yeah, let's hold that question when Craig comes up.
And then special projects, 6701 for 5,000. Do we know what that is?
So I think that once we get into
The departments.
the department heads detail, I'm confident that all of these questions will be answered. So would it be okay with you if we wait for those reports to go through that detail, Sally?
And if we don't, we'll come back to it, so. We'll get through these. I think we'll get through these tonight, so. So materials and services is overall pretty much a very small increase compared to the current year. Budget, 2.74 versus 2.76. Capital outlay is also down, 236 down to 141. Again, there's some IT. If you look at computer software, 7053, we had $75,000 projected in the current year's spending. We're not budgeting anything in that line item. So that's another question for Brad when he comes.
that's the financial software, actually. That's in the finance
Okay.
department.
So we'll be done.
Will be, well, as done as one ever gets with
That's right.
software, but yes.
Debt service, so you see the principal and the interest for the 2001 YMCA loan, nothing budgeted for next year because that loan is paid off.
And along with that earlier statement that we don't receive any revenue from the Y, was it tied strictly to the bond? So they're still occupying the building,
Yeah, it wasn't really.
but we don't receive any rental income?
That's correct. So the way that the agreement was put together, it was termed as a lease for, I think, for legal reasons. But the intent was to use that for the debt service, for the expansion of the teen center, and the improvements that were done in the second phase. So the amount was tied to the expansion of the facility. The bonds were paid off in January, and therefore, the agreement was finished.
So the agreement with the Y ends in 18, right?
Correct.
And so for a year and how many months, they're not paying any rent? Is that right?
That's correct.
Wow.
So they're taking all of the income that they're receiving from all of their members, and they're not paying a dime to use the facility? And haven't been since January, is that correct?
I think I'd want to get back to you on whether it's not a dime or not. There certainly are other, there are other things, but certainly the large payment that was coming
Large
in
payment is-
was really to pay off the debt service related to the expansion of the facility, so.
So it sounds like the Y had some kind of a balloon payment that was required to fulfill their obligation. Is that correct?
No,
No? Okay.
it would be the opposite. There's no payment, that
No, I
somehow
mean-
that got tied strictly to the debt service. That is unbelievable for that size of a facility. And given the fact that for how many years they weren't even paying water. Seriously, I can't,
It's quite a deal if you can get it.
it's not, I mean, it's a 20-year-old
good deal.
agreement, whatever, but that is a lot of money that we are foregoing as a town having a tenant that has to pay no rent for what, 18 months?
If that happened at the Art Center, we'd be in big trouble.
Stunning.
Were the payments as a monthly type rental, or was it just an amortization of the money owed? And whether you pay it in 18 months or 20 months or whatever, you're paying the same amount. It just depends on how you spread it out, right?
It could. I
I haven't looked at the numbers, but.
probably not a budget
We can
issue
go
at
back
this
and look
point.
at that, but this gets to the heart of the matter is you have a very poor agreement. That both sides disagree and you have different players over the years. So the debt's paid, and that's why we're going out to look at options, and whoever we land on, it's gonna be a different deal. So if the council chooses to stick with the YMCA, I think the deal is gonna look very different than the deal that was struck 20 years ago.
So in the interim, the 18 months that they're not making any rent payments, are they doing any repairs to the facility? Like if something, or is that something that we're also taking care of? And maybe that's something that you get back to us on. Maybe there's a threshold, I don't,
Yeah, well, I think the simple answer to that is, you know, if there are additional excess revenues, that goes into what is their capital fund, and they have spent money on capital improvements over time. So I guess we don't know for sure, because those expenditures come out of what is in their bottom line after the operating revenues to go in facility. So I don't have a specific answer as to what they may or may not do as far as capital improvements with those monies that they aren't expending to the city. But that's typically how they've done it in the past.
Perhaps the question, and please correct me if I'm not understanding your correction, or your question, but perhaps the answer that we're looking for is, what is the Y's obligation in regard to maintenance of the building while they occupy the building?
Well, and I think then
and
the
and
other
are we
question.
paying to keep them there for free? I mean, we still obviously will have some obligations on the building, but what are,
We don't pay them anything
Right.
not
direct.
Not
directly, but
Are we, for their use of the building while they occupy it?
Well, and I think I'm hearing that a clarification on, you know, what, because, you know, I don't think that the budget committee has read the agreement. And so can you give a breakdown on these years that you are providing here, fiscal year 13, 14, 15, you know, can you give a breakdown as to, you know, what was paid, what was the agreement saying that it would be paid, and then,
we can do that.
yeah, I think that would help to
I think that would
clarify
help a
for
lot.
everyone.
And if you've and this information's on the city website, if you've never read the TKW review, our auditors from about 3 years ago, that looked at the operating agreement and poked holes, basically, and said, look, these are areas that need to be clarified. It was a poorly written, hindsight, looking backward, it was a poorly written document. Both parties agree to that. So,
Okay, moving forward.
so we'll provide some additional information, so.
Would it be okay if I answer just a couple of the questions that Sally had?
Absolutely.
So I believe you had a question, I didn't write down who asked the questions, but on printing and advertising, there are two parts to that. One is another issue, just like the phones.
Oh, yeah, that's
The
right.
Archer was not included in the budget for this year, the printing of the Archer, and that's a fairly significant expense.
And we printed the Archer, because the expectation.
The expectation
to
is it's
do the city newsletter.
$15,600 budgeted for next year. $15,600. And then we also had to renew a lot of copier leases, and so those went up just a little bit. That's just the other piece of the difference. But most of it has to do with the Archer not being in the budget this year. So that's on the printing question. On the repair and maintenance, it's gonna come down to a one-time expense or a maintenance expense, a large expense that was included. And so we'll address that when we get to the larger expenses that were included. That comes out of the one-time pot as opposed to the operating expenses. It's put into repair and maintenance because it relates to a maintenance project at the parks. And that was $160,000, I believe.
What was
So-
that line item again?
For the repair and maintenance,
6313.
Yes. So if you add all the expenditures up, if you look at current year adopted budget, you get to 12.2. We're gonna be spending slightly above 12 million. So we're living within the budget. And then next year's budget, it goes up to 12.5. So it's about a 300,000, give or take, increase when you compare year to year.
And then Sally, your question on Special Project 6701, that's actually showing up in the Senior Center budget, which is a new budget, obviously. The description's on its furnishing, so we'll look into that more, because that should have been in a different line item and not sitting out there in special projects, so.
it should have been in furnishings, I apologize. When we take over the center, we don't know as of yet which items are going to come with the center and which ones belong basically to the city and which they're going to give us. And so we set aside $5,000 because we don't know what line it needs to go into yet. So it's just a set aside so that we have money to do that.
Okay, so I'm gonna propose that we actually skip over to page 6 and 7, because that's just now taking 6 or 7 departments and collapsing them into the admin division. I think there's more value looking at each department. All the departments add up into the admin division, so.
Page 6 and 7?
Oh, is this the non-departmental? I'm sorry, you're right. So this is what I was gonna say you do, because I. And I did that. I
My book
messed it
even
up.
says Katie on the top of it.
Shut up, Joe. So will you explain the non-departmental?
So
Now that
non-departmental.
I've confused
6 and
everybody.
7.
So this is where the costs go that basically relate to all different departments in the city or to no department. Things that benefit everything as a whole. A lot of these costs are then allocated to departments. This is another special project that we'll be doing in the upcoming year, which will be to determine how we should allocate these costs. The city doesn't currently have a really good plan, so we'll be looking at who really benefits from each of these things and how do we make sure that the costs go to the appropriate cost centers so that we have a good reflection of how much do things cost. So basically, this is the area where all the general revenues come in. So our property taxes come in, our franchise fees come in, and then all of our administrative overhead. So any time that's allocated to water, stormwater, for example, we process the water utilities payroll. So they need to pay a part of finances charges because we handle their things. That comes as a negative. So you'll see that the bottom line in this department is a negative number. And that means that we actually recover a lot of the costs in this. It's through the administrative reimbursement, and that's on page 7, 6801. And you'll see that even though we're revamping how we're doing it, that number's not changing too much. So that's good. We've been looking at it very carefully. We'll be looking at it some more. So we recover $800,000 out of the total general funds cost from the enterprise funds. The other piece to that is the revenues that Joe already went over, the property taxes, the franchise fees. I don't think we need to go over those anymore. And then the debt is also significantly decreasing. So those are the main parts to that. We do have a few miscellaneous revenues. That's where the interest for the general fund goes. We don't allocate it out to the different departments. It just all goes in that one bucket. $50,000, still really low. We're hoping to get it up. But as of right now, the LGIP, the pool dictates pretty much our interest, and we don't have any investments anywhere else besides there at this time. And then the basic postage for the city all get almost all of it gets lumped together. I won't say all of it, but almost all of it gets lumped together. And then things like the Archer, and things like that go in this area. So that's the one area where you may notice is a decrease in our internet access cost. And this has to do with the fact that Sherwood Broadband provides our internet, which is, a fund within the city. And so those costs are subject to change. We're able to adjust those costs. So are there any questions on the non-departmental?
The costs that you have, the 6801, that what I'm assuming is they're flowing back from the other non-departmental, are these actual costs, or are you applying a cost factor?
So what we do is the way it's done right now, and again, we're going to be revamping it, but we take all of the costs for, so for the city manager, for council, for finance, that benefit other departments. And then we allocate those costs each month based on, and right now, the allocation method is based on payroll. So the departments, based on the percentage of total payroll that each department pays, then they pay that percentage of those administrative costs. And so then we recover it from them. You'll see in their departments, when we get to water, stormwater, streets, you'll see an administrative reimbursement line. And so each month we calculate based on actual amounts spent, and then we recover it back from those departments.
Okay, so you're not talking about like a materials charge or anything like that? This is strictly just straight off of the payroll?
No.
And the benefits?
It's all of the charges in those departments, but it's allocated based on the payroll. So a department that has 500,000 in payroll will pay twice as much as a department that has 250,000 in payroll, but they'll pay their share of the total cost, all the supplies, the materials, the personnel, all of that.
Basically, their percentage of the overhead
That's correct.
of the city.
Yeah, and what percentage generally is that? Oh, I apologize. What-
Did we?
Right, but I mean,
Are we
what's
still
the
following a 4% rule?
I don't know what 4% rule we're
Like,
talking about.
every department was charged 4% for administration? Didn't we do that before?
Well, that
I
was
think
gonna
that's
be my
what
question. What are
that
we
last
doing
year,
by
or
percentage?
when they were talking about the water, the overhead that was in the water, remember that was a big, long
Right, right,
discussion?
right.
You're talking about the administrative overhead. That's what you're talking about, right?
Right. Okay.
I just wanna know what the range is.
Is that what we're talking
Yeah,
about?
I just wanna know what the range is. I guess is it up to 10%, up to 15%? Is it 6%?
I'm trying to look it up. I have two
Sorry.
windows open.
There's 15.
I have a habit of doing it. Administrative overhead. So when you're asking a percent, what do you mean by there are lots of ways of calculating a
Oh.
percent.
Well, you're saying that the percent is of the total
So if you
payroll in each,
So the total administrative, for example, this is April of this year. So we have how much was spent in each of these departments. These are the departments that are allocated. That gives us the total to be allocated. Then we look at all of the other departments and what their payroll was. And then we allocate, based on what their percentage of total payroll is, what their share is of that total.
Oh, so 3%
So-
of the total, of the
So
245.
3% of the 245.
right, so then you'd have to divide, set the first line, 7,200 by 19,000 to get the
To get the
department percentage.
And it
Okay.
changes every month
Yeah.
because depending on how much, the percent of the individual department's pay isn't that much, but it could vary it could be 200,000, it could be 150,000, it could be 400,000, depending on the projects being done in those
It just
specific.
makes it a lot more accurate. It seems like it's
Right.
very accurate down by the month.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we'll be doing a true-up at the end of this year to make sure that if there were any changes throughout the year, if we found any errors, that those were also taken into account. So in July, once we get through the year, We'll be doing a full year and compare what we actually posted to what was done throughout the year, and then we'll do a true-up entry.
Is it possible to get a copy of that?
Yeah, or some sample of how they figured.
Of just like one of the months of,
Yeah,
of how.
just to show what the analysis is.
And Katie, is this different than, because you came in with a fresh set of eyes, is this different than what we did in previous years? And you want to change it in the future?
This is
Or is this
similar to,
consistent?
it's similar to what was done recently, but not the same as what has been done. So my understanding, it was tweaked a little bit in the recent years. I don't know exactly how it was done. I do want to change it. My goal, and that's part of the reason that Brenda is here, is that she is going to be working on creating a model for different allocation bases. In other words, IT might allocate based on the number of computers that we have, whereas finance would allocate based on the number of W-2s. And, you know, so we shouldn't necessarily just allocate based on payroll, because the public works guys who are out in the field aren't using a computer. So why are they paying for the computers? You know, it's just, we need to think a little more in depth about the allocation base.
So would it be fair to say we want to be a little bit more sophisticated in
Oh,
terms of
yes.
an allocation?
Is there a way that you could do that with your existing programming that you have?
We have lots of brain power.
I'm thinking computers, and cars, and vehicles.
It can be as elaborate or as simple as,
Can you run that up again?
so that's the top right there.
Yeah, I mean, well, run it
Oh, sorry.
down. Why is the police department 33% so high?
Their payroll's
Biggest
huge.
chunk of our budget.
Largest part of our
That's-
budget.
And all of
Big chunk of our
these-
budget.
So it's all-
And these
it's
do
all
not get
mostly
allocated.
payroll then.
So the basic idea is that this is how much these general fund departments use, but they aren't going to pay because they're in the general fund. So they're not charged the money, but we can't allocate their share to the utilities. That wouldn't be fair. They need to, the general fund needs to bear the burden of the general fund. So this model just allows us to take their share out before we allocate the rest of this on. So we only recover 61,000 out of the 245. The rest of it is used by general fund departments.
So that 834 is the,
Is a compilation of that.
6801 line item is the compilation of the bottom.
That's correct. It's
Section
just the
from the
bottom
utilities.
portions.
Yeah.
To get back to that level of sophistication you're talking about, is that for future budget years, not this budget year?
We'll see how fast we can move. My suspicion is that we'll be able to implement it for 18-19. It's gonna take quite a bit of work. My hope is 18-19.
So the proposed budget item that you have on 6801 and then is reflected in the other departments as expenses, that's based on this model?
That's correct.
The non-sophistication one, so that we can move forward with this. Got it. Thank you.
And I don't think I need to remind everybody, 2 years ago, I had one finance director. Last year, I had an interim finance director. Now I have a third finance director in 3 years putting the budget together. So I've had 3 different sets of eyes. I've told Katie she cannot leave. She needs to be. So there's consistency year to year.
Is this something that we would look at mid-year and do any kind of correction, or is that not applicable at a mid-year?
It would depend how far off we are. We'll need to run some numbers and see how close they are. If we're not terribly hurting an enterprise fund, then we wouldn't make a change mid-year. I wouldn't recommend it unless the auditors have significant issues with it. It's really a preference, and it's really just how we want to move forward in, you know, a fair and equitable way. But it's not, as it looks right now, it's an acceptable method, it's just not the preferred method.
So if you made the change mid-year, as long as it didn't affect the bottom, the line for each department or each fund's budget, you could still change that and make that within.
You could.
and without having to go to council to make a change to the budget, as long as you're within the budget guidelines. Okay.
And what this analysis is saying is that we're only pulling $61,000 from the enterprise funds
That's correct.
into the general fund to help supplement the
That's
general
correct,
fund.
exactly.
And that's all of the enterprise funds.
Yes, for that month.
For that month.
For that month, that's just that month, yeah. Yep, so it starts here with water, and then all of these down below. And the reason there are so many is that each project, each capital project bears its portion of that overhead, so that it's properly allocated to each project.
And this would be something if we, I shouldn't say if, when we change the allocation model, when we meet during the year as a budget committee, we'd bring this to you in that non-May meeting to kind of go over and make sure you guys understand and things like that. This has been an issue that's always raised. How do we allocate our resources and our administrative overhead? And
Yeah.
it's not a new issue for us.
Yeah, what the citizens care about is, are we funding general fund through our water bill? Or are we funding it through our sewer bill or whatever? Are we paying too much? So,
And we are, the question is the way we're doing it fair? Is it fair to those funds, those enterprise funds? So. Anything else on these 2 pages?
Only
Any
if
other
there are any
questions?
questions.
Thank you. How are we doing time-wise? We're about an hour in.
Good.
Chair, how do you want to do in terms of breaks? Do you want to take one break? We're scheduled to go to 9 o'clock, so.
Are you done generally with your overview for now?
Much, I
And
want to
we're
start
ready
getting
to
into
jump into
specific
department
departments
heads?
now.
So I'd like to suggest we take a very short 5-minute break and we get right back to it with department heads.
And I want to reiterate, or if there's anyone in the audience that wants to testify tonight, so we know how many people, if you can fill the forms out and submit it to Jean, so we can allocate enough time, that would be helpful.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and get going.
Okay. So let's start to go through the individual departments
Department heads.
within, starting with admin. On page 9, is what I want to focus on, that's the city council's budget. And you'll see their total expenditure, there is a proposed decrease compared to the current year. 22.8 is what their adopted budget is for this year, and it's being proposed to be cut down to 17.6. The biggest chunk of that is training for the council. And again, there is money in the proposed budget for counselors to attend the League of Oregon Cities Conference. The Oregon Mayor's Conference is still in the budget. It's real small for the top page. But what has been eliminated is out-of-state training for next year in my proposed budget. So that's the biggest change in the proposed budget for the council for next year. It's not a huge budget when you think of a $26 million budget. It's $17,000, so. Yes, Councilor Young.
What falls under the community support and promotion? So we budgeted 2,300, but we're estimating 6,500, and then we're gonna budget.
Yeah, so where is that? Which one is that?
Oh, sorry, 6602.
6602. So one of the things that is different in next year's budget in that line item is the Rose Festival float. The charges for supplies and things like that are coming out of the city manager's budget in the current year, and I'm shifting that to the council budget next year. And that's about, I think that was a $2,000, yeah, it's about a $2,000 item.
And is that why it went up this year from the 2,300 to the
Now, there were
6,500?
some also associated, some things that were not in the budget associated with the mayor being a Royal Rosarian, which we didn't know last year. She was going to be offered to be a Royal Rosarian, so there's some costs that were allocated to that line item in this year's budget, so.
The 5,800 or the?
Yeah, that's why the 6,500. And those costs would not, they're one-time costs, those would not be ongoing, so. And then other things in that line item, there's the Christmas parade candy, it's Robin Hood parade candy.
That's still in the community support.
Yes.
So if I just might interject really quickly, not about what you're talking about specifically, but for anyone that is looking at the budget in the public, as you're looking through this section of budget detail, you can also toggle between the narrative under budget detail, and you will see more clearly what department heads have proposed in this budget. So you have a little bit more information to review as you're going through all of these numbers.
Yes, that's a good reminder. So the city council budget detail in the document is on page 46.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So any other questions about the council budget at all?
Nope.
All right. The next department is Department 12, is the city recorder department. Sylvia is here if there's any specific questions that you have that I may not be the best one to answer, she can answer. Her budget, in the current year, total budget in that department was $185,000, and it's bumping up to $201,000 overall next year.
So the one question I would have is the jump in legal.
There is nothing in.
Under city record?
Under elections, possibly?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Excuse me, after legal.
So Sylvia, do you want to respond to that specifically?
So basically, the adjustment in legal is due to, when we have an election or an anticipated election, I have to kind of guesstimate what I'm going to use or what I'm going to need. The petitions, we had a lot of petitions, charter amendments, so I kind of have to estimate for those as well. So it's kind of a guessing game when it comes to petitions that are filed with the city. So a lot of times I generally estimate high, and that's why you'll see that 15,000.
Right.
There was one year where I didn't use very much, so I estimated low the following year.
Okay, perfect.
Kind of guessing.
So
Thank
does
you.
that
You'll-
follow the elections, the alternating years? Is
Correct.
that why you're seeing the?
And
As-
it does jump around. If you notice the
Yeah.
actuals, you know, in 13-14, it was only $750, but then the next year it jumped to almost 15,000, and then it dropped back down to 1937.
Yeah.
So, and just as an educational piece, if it's a special election, so if it's a September election or a March election, and we have something on the ballot, we will be charged more for that because those are special elections and there aren't races in other jurisdictions. And we have to plan for that.
And the only election that the city, a government agency doesn't pay for is a primary and a general. Those are the only two that we don't pay for. Any other election, as long as there's an election calendar open from the state and we participate, then we will pay that.
Just as a note, moving forward, if staff can please come up so that you're in the microphone, we can't hear, they won't be able to hear the televised version if it's not spoken into a microphone, even though we can all hear in the room.
Okay.
How many FTEs do we have for the city recorder?
1.5.
1.5.
And the one is here, and the half
Yes.
is not.
It's not.
Any other major questions about the city recorder's budget?
And the increase for the regular salaries and wages from the 103 to the 110?
It's step increases and step and COLA.
And that'll be a theme, Susan, when you see that line item going up. It's primarily, there may be some exceptions, is because of COLAs and step increases. So there may be some, I think there's some departments where we've allocated differently and that.
Yes, there are.
That we can explain, but this one is specifically
Purely.
step and COLA.
And with our employees for the step increases, those are on a regular basis and happen automatically unless there's some kind of a negative review. Is that correct?
Correct.
On an
Unless,
annual-
unless they're topped out, if they've reached the
Right.
top of the pay scale, which we have a significant number of our employees that are topped out.
So then it would just be the COLAs.
Correct.
Okay, moving on to city manager.
City manager budget, and just as a reminder, the city manager's department includes myself, Tina, my assistant, and a good portion of Tom Pessimir's time.
So what is that, 4 or 3.5 FTEs?
2.5.
2.5.
2.5. She's gonna ask FTEs, so you might wanna make sure you.
3.25.
3.25?
Oh.
Tom and Tina?
There's a small 0.25 for an intern. You may recall we've participated, this will be the 4th year, assuming the budget gets approved, for us to share an intern with West Lynn. So for 6 months, we have had for the last 3 years, an intern work 20 hours a week for Sherwood, 20 hours a week for West Lynn. And
If
that's,
they're an intern, aren't they not getting paid?
no, it's a paid intern. It's a paid internship.
So the paid intern is 0.25?
That's correct.
So Tom, there's a tiny bit of a decrease in health benefits. Is that because of staff change or hours or?
It's purely because we have some percentage allocation between the time. And so
Okay.
it's mainly Tom's time that is kind of shifting between the URA and
Got it.
economic development and things like that. So there's these tiny shifts that happen.
Allocations, okay.
Yeah, more of Tom's time in salary is dedicated to URA. Some of my time is dedicated to URA, but not as much as Tom, so.
So Joe, when you said it's you and Tina, and you said your assistant,
Tina is assistant.
you weren't talking about 2 people, you were talking about her as your assistant? Okay.
So Joe, it looks like on line 6209, the training, we're also significantly cutting training and conferences as well.
Yes.
I'd like to express some concern about that. And my concern about that is actually not just limited to the city manager's time and his department, but also across the board. And it's something that I would like a little bit more information on, because I think it's really important that our staff does indeed receive the training and conferences that they need to be successful for our city. And while I very much appreciate that staff has diligently looked at all of their numbers, I really would like to be assured that we're not sacrificing really important continuing education and keeping up with trends that are happening right now.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think that's something that we looked at. So I'll give you, just for myself, some examples of training that I've included and training that I haven't included.
Okay.
So for city managers, and Tom goes to a lot of these as well, there is a summer conference that always happens historically in Bend, a 3-day conference, and that's part of my continuing education. I'm a credentialed city manager, so I have to commit to 40 hours a week. And by going to those conferences, that is helping me to do that. I originally was not going to go this summer. I was going to cut that, like, I don't need to go this summer. But I'm still on the OCCMA board, and I'm actually presenting at the conference. So I'm going to the summer.
Yeah.
The national conference, which is more expensive, this will be in San Antonio. This was Tom's year to go, because we go back and forth and alternate. We cut that. Quite honestly, that's not a luxury, I hate to say luxury. It's a great conference to attend, you learn a lot, but it's expensive, and by not going, it's not like we're gonna fall behind or anything like that. So
Okay.
those are examples of, out-of-state training that we cut, that, as the budget gets a little less tight, we can add that back in future years.
And what, generally, how much is a conference like that?
ICMA, $750 was cut for his ACE, and that's actually half.
That's only half, because the other half
1,500.
is in the URA, so.
Oh, okay.
1,500.
Oh, interesting.
So that's
Okay.
airfare, that's hotel, that's conference registration. The ICMA conference is about, I think it's a $675 conference registration. So that's an example of something that, quite honestly, we can do without
Okay.
for a year. Next spring is the Northwest Regional Managers Conference. This is a regional conference between Oregon, Washington, Alaska, and Idaho. I didn't put that in my budget. I'm not on the board next year. I can live without that, quite honestly. And part of this is I've told my departments to cut their training budget. I need to live under the same kind of rules.
So
And-
I guess going forward, as we're reviewing the budget, what I would like to know, and I'm sure that the committee would like to know, is if training or conference has been cut from a particular staff budget and they feel it could be detrimental or cause an ill effect to their role or functionality, I would like to know that.
Sure.
I think we all would.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Or retention.
Yeah, for sure.
Or
The-
retention,
The
good
other
point.
thing I
Yeah.
think we can do next year, and there are a lot of webinars now and training that are free
Right.
or at a greatly reduced rate that you don't have to travel for. And I think we as an organization can take more advantage of those type of trainings now. You don't have to go physically somewhere for training. So we didn't eliminate training, but we cut it substantially. And that was a choice that I made, because if I cut no training, I probably would have cut a person.
Right. No, and that,
Think about the $65,000 cut in training overall. That's a person
Yeah.
when you include salary and benefits.
okay.
And I'd rather go a year with reduced training and hope that the budget comes back next year and we can afford that. I wouldn't want to do that on an ongoing basis, but for 1 year, I think that's the right choice.
Okay.
You as a committee could think differently. So,
Can I say one thing with that, too? If we get one good idea that's an amazing idea out of one of those high-level seminars that, like the national one that Tom's gonna miss, that's something that we need to consider too, because we don't wanna keep reinventing wheels.
sure.
And so, I mean, I'm with Merida on that, just surgically pulling back. But if there's something that's marginal, I'd rather err on the side of, you two are our top administrators, and we need best practices every single step of the way, and best practices change all the time. And we, as a small town, in the whole midst of everything, those national conferences, I think, are extremely vital to us.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe see that, going to the council, for example. I know that you guys we had 2 counselors and the mayor, and then a couple staff from the planning commission went to St. Louis this last year, and I heard the presentation, and there's some fantastic ideas that came out of that trip. So I think there's certainly some value, and I know that those went into some of our goal discussions that we had shortly after. So I guess I'd be interested in knowing, are we cutting an entire trip, or do we look at that and say the mayor and 1 counselor versus the mayor and 2 counselors goes on a trip?
Well, in the example of that conference, in my proposed budget, totally eliminated any funding for that. That will be in San Francisco this year, so travel won't be as expensive. But again, because I generally said out-of-state travel is probably where we should cut first, I felt I'm gonna do the same with the council as I did with staff.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think
You
it's
know.
okay to say that for a year, but keep it mindful that
Yes.
it doesn't want to be an ongoing practice.
Correct.
I mean, everybody tightens their belt once in a while.
Yeah.
So, I think that's.
And quite honest, when I'm faced with trying to say, okay, do we cut $65,000 in training and we don't do as much as we normally do for a year versus cutting a real person that's gonna be out on the street? If I cut that person, that the organization response is gonna be like, well, we could have cut our training because the work's there.
Yeah.
And now we're gonna pick up more work, and that can have a negative effect on morale as well. So it's a balancing act. It's all about choices.
And I like your approach of being more efficient at training too, finding other resources that are cheaper. And so cutting the budget doesn't necessarily mean cutting all training.
Correct.
Right.
Because now I'm faced just for my own, I'm like, okay, I've got a commitment for 40 hours. How am I going to do that if I'm not going to these conferences that normally? Well, I can do other things. I can read a book. That qualifies. You can read certain books and, you know, and allocate your training for that. So there's other ways to get educated besides going somewhere for a training.
You can have people come here.
Correct.
Webcam thing.
Exactly.
Thank
So I
you for
think,
touching on
I
that.
think Counselor Harris is right. This is not something that I'd want to see happening on an ongoing basis, but it was a choice that I made for this coming year. And I think you should ask department directors respectively, because they came up with the cuts within their own department.
So I'd like to warn the department
I
heads.
think,
Just be prepared with that one, because we'd like to know.
and we anticipated that,
Yeah.
so. Any other questions on the city manager's proposed budget? So you'll see in 6602, community support and promotion, nothing in that line. That's, part of that's the float. So I've shifted that to the council budget. It all comes out of admin, it all comes out of general fund. It's just how we budget it, and it's not in the city manager's budget.
I have one question, Joe. It's kind of an overall question. I noticed there's a TriMet tax on each department. What is that?
It's a percent that we're required to remit to TriMet for
And
transportation.
And it's based on.
Payroll
State
base.
It's a
Payroll.
percent, it's a
Payroll
percent
tax.
of payroll. Mhm. It's a payroll tax.
What is that percentage? Just curious.
Probably calculated based on the salary.
Katie is so good.
I know.
Thank
you, Katie.
It is. It's the right
And
call.
I believe all businesses pay that
Yep.
Yeah.
tax. I don't think it's
If
unique
you're in
to
the
government.
boundaries, you have to look in, not everybody in the
Bus
9/7
line.
and 4 is.
0.8%.
Wow.
I don't mind paying that when they increase service to Sherwood.
Yeah.
That you don't use.
I know.
Okay. If there are no questions on the city managers, Mr. Soper, before you leave, if you want to come up. So, Josh is going to be taking a well-deserved vacation starting tomorrow. You leave
Far
what time?
away.
3:30 a.m. tomorrow.
But he's here to talk about his departmental budget, and once he's done, he's going home to get to bed, so.
Well, pack and then get to bed.
Yeah.
So Tom, he'll need your microphone if he needs to speak.
So not a lot of changes in his proposed budget. We're starting to see a history now that we have almost 2 years of history as a department, although that first year was only partial, wasn't it?
Right.
I have one question, on your budget, and that is 6104, legal services. Is that for, outside counsel?
That's right, yes.
So that 20,000 that is projected for the current year, was that a number of things, or was that largely? Can you
It's
talk
a number
about
of things. So that's a line item for when we need to hire outside legal services. Generally, it's for some subject matter expertise that I don't have. It's also where we would budget for if we need to hire an outside investigator for an employment issue, primarily is where that comes up. The issues this year were primarily land use, surety issues, and some franchise fee issues. And actually, the majority of the outside legal services we had to use this year, we were able to pay out of a different revenue stream through I don't remember what it's called, but a county tax of some kind that we have access to. TDT. So that's part of why we came in, we're projecting to come in significantly under what we adopted.
And just so you know, we've only used 5,500 so far. We have to leave enough in the projections that if something does come up and we have to use outside counsel, that we still have enough there to do it. So we haven't spent 20,000 so far, we've only spent 5,500, but there's
There's some ongoing projects, and there's also the possibility of, if an employment investigation comes up in the next few months, then we have to pay for that. Right.
So we may be less than that.
we may
at
be less
year-end.
than the 20,000.
Okay.
And what's the FTE on this department?
2. We also have an intern, but it's an unpaid intern.
I was curious on the health benefits for this department with 2 people being more than your city manager department.
So for health benefits, well, first of all, for the city manager's department, yes, there are 3.25 FTEs, but they're not all paid out of those lines. So they're allocated. So let me give you a little bit more specifics. If you're trying to figure out per person, because that's what it sounds like you're doing. Or to the right column. City manager's budget actually has 2.6 because portions of Joe's are allocated to the URA. Tom only has 40% that's in the general manager, in the city manager's budget. So it's actually 2.6. Now, as far as benefits go, you have to remember that each person may have different costs for benefits. So an employee only versus a full family, we prefer to not disclose those amounts
No.
because they give personal information. So because of the small number of employees in these departments, I'd rather not discuss why the amounts are different, but they're calculated based on the actual amounts each employee contributes based on the number of people in their families and the related premium.
And our employee benefit goes to the employee, it doesn't go to the family, right? Or is it a combination?
It's a combination.
It's a combination.
So is this, 2 full-time employees then?
Yes. Yeah, we don't allocate any of your time to URA or anything else. Nope.
What about line 6214, Josh? The dues to organizations.
Yes, yeah, I thought that one might come up. So you also notice there's a similar decrease in the miscellaneous purchase services line item. So that was just a matter of putting something in the wrong line item. It's our legal research services through Westlaw. We budgeted that under miscellaneous purchase services, and turns out we should be paying that out of dues to organizations. And so that's why we're over budget and projected, and also why the proposed budget is significantly higher for 17-18, but lower for miscellaneous purchase services.
Thank
Any
you,
other
Josh.
questions? All right, thank you.
Enjoy your vacation.
So while the next
We'll
person.
call you.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, While the next person's coming up, so as a general policy, we're not trying to ask specifics. Do we basically, as a city, cover the family health benefit for our employees?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
We don't cover it entirely. We cover 90%.
okay.
So 90% of the 90% of the lower of the medical costs between the 2 plans that we offer, but for the employee plus the entire family.
So, and one thing I want to mention, when we put the budget together, it's based on the information that we have from CIS, which was a 5%, roughly a 5% increase on the medical. We just got information earlier this week that the actual increase is going to be 3.4% if you're under the Regents plan and 2.8% if you're under the Kaiser Medical. So, so those numbers that are reflected in here will be slightly different at some point, but it's not really material. But it is less than what they had originally
Just extra
anticipated.
wiggle room that we have in those line items.
And why do we cover families' insurance? Is there a policy
Employee
there?
benefit.
I guess I would say, why wouldn't we? I've never worked somewhere
Very
that
common
doesn't.
employee benefit.
Your whole family?
You pay more.
You pay more, yeah, the premiums are more.
Oh, I thought we were covering the cost of the premiums,
So,
90%.
so we cover 90% of the cost of the premiums.
For their whole plan, regardless if they're single or family.
That's correct.
And we have some employees who choose not to take medical insurance at all because it's covered under their spouse or other things. So it's,
And that's why some departments
Right.
will have a lower for higher FTEs, because some of them choose to not.
It's competitive.
Not all businesses.
No, it is a good benefit.
It's a very good
to have.
benefit.
So, and I think a lot of folks especially in the private sector, don't have those kind of benefits. And I think that's what I'm hearing from you, so.
Yeah, I mean, my husband works at Intel, and if I were on his plan, we'd be paying for me, so they don't, and that's a great employer as well. That's a great benefit.
Which is great, given we're unable with this budget to do larger step increases for a lot of our staff. So I think this benefit is fantastic.
Okay, Brad, can you come out, please, from behind the screen? So IT is the next department.
So before we start on IT, I have a question on, back on the page 10, excuse me. Got a little bit of a voice thing going on here, but I just had, there were a couple questions asked on this, and I just want to understand it. On the city recorder expenditure on 6011 on the salary and wages, I'm confused as to why they kind of jump around, and then I'm confused. Am I calculating this right on the projected 1617, the 103, 650, and then the proposed 1718, 110, 754? That's a 14.6% increase. So that 14.6% increase is the COLA and the cost.
Both employees are not, neither of them are topped out. So they have their step increases.
Which
And
is
then
how much? 2.5%.
2.5%.
So I think it's closer to 7%.
7% is what I'm coming up with.
And so what, that number, what is the top out number?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
For this, that employee, what is the top out number for that category?
Order.
For the city recorder?
It's on page 92.
92.
Okay.
I think she was topped out when we were.
That's what's confusing me.
Yeah.
Right, and that's why I want to understand, because there was a change in the way this is administered, and that's why I want to really understand it is, this employee used to be under the city council, and now
Yes.
they are under the city manager, and so I want to make sure that I'm understanding with the change, how that is calculated. So you say 92?
Yeah, on page 92, you'll see the city recorder position is now within group range 5, or F.
F.
It's the same level as the building official and library manager. We don't have the steps in there, but the top step is 7672
Okay.
a month. So if you times that by 12, you can get an annual salary.
Okay, that helps, thank you. That's the information I was looking for.
So Mayor, you may recall when we made that transition, we did a survey of other city recorder positions and compared salaries from other, or comparable jurisdictions and where we were. There was no salary range when she was a contract employee, and we identified what the range would be, and she still has room to move within that range. She's getting close to the top, but she's not at the top.
That's all I want to know, thank you.
Yep,
And I
So that
apologize, I came in
maximum-
right when that happened, I think.
yes.
The maximum monthly, then you just times it by 12, and then
Yes,
that's
that would be an
the
annual salary.
maximum annual.
And I just wanted to ask the question because it was a change from
Yes.
our last fiscal year, and so I wanted to make sure that that was explained to our public.
Okay, we're back to IT. Brad is here. So we're back on page 13 of 41. So your overall budget is going up by about $30,000 next year. Pretty healthy jump in personnel services, though. So I can anticipate people saying, what's going on there, so.
So, last year, Sherwood Broadband hired back the network engineer position, and fully funded it that year. And maybe Katie can help talk to this too. And that was the intent, was that it was gonna be a fully funded Sherwood Broadband employee, And as a service to the city, that person would do general fund work, but it would all be billed under Sherwood Broadband. The issue came is that the overhead was just astronomical, and it almost killed the broadband utility. So we decided, when Katie came on, that we would, in her advice was that general fund should pay for general fund duties, Sherwood Broadband should pay for Sherwood Broadband duties, and if we need Sherwood Broadband to pay more into the general fund, we can figure that out through a fee or a tax, and I think we cut the fee that the general fund pays Sherwood Broadband in half this year as a part to kind of compensate for that increase in personal services. And we can cut that even more in future years too. So that was kind of the trade-off, so to speak. So I think it was, yeah.
So that position is now fully in your
It's 50,
IT?
it's like 50,
Oh, it's
50.
half? Okay.
So
So that's one of the reasons for the big increase.
It's the main,
that's the main
it's
reason,
the
yeah.
main reason.
Does that make sense, everybody?
So I have a question, if I can move off of that. So 6503 and 6504, fairly significant decreases in computer equipment, computer software purchase. I guess when looking at information technology out of any departments, I'm wondering why we're cutting so much in that department. That seems like a lot for technology.
So we run on a cycle with a lot of our equipment replacement, and we happen to be in one of those years where we're in an off cycle, where we don't have a server replacement, we don't have desktop replacement. I'll back up a little bit. Technically, we do have a desktop replacement cycle that's past due, but we have made a determination in the IT department that we can probably reuse what we already have if we boost up the hardware that's already in them. So we're gonna replace hard drives and put more memory in things and try to eke out some more lifespan. At some point, we are gonna have to replace these things. We replaced all of our server infrastructure last year, so we're good for probably 5 years on that. We have a storage system that's gonna come up in a couple of years, so we just happen to fall into one of those off years where our replacement cycle has little need.
And if you look on the 5-year trend, that it's in your budget book and it was in your packets, you see, the fund balance goes up and then the fund balance goes down. It was because I met with Brad and said, okay, you can't just be cutting software. This doesn't make sense in the long run. And so we identified which years and how much we would need, and those were plugged into the 5-year model. And that's why you see it drop back down again, because I wanted to make sure that we were taking into account that we're going to need this IT and that we were thinking of it longer term. So it is included in the more long-term model, and we sat down, we talked about how could we do this and do we need to set money aside and that type of thing. So we've been talking about the fact that these replacements will have to happen.
So we talk about using the technology to replace training, for example, doing remote training, web training. I want to make sure we're not cutting too hard in that department. And
I feel confident in this budget. I don't feel like this year is gonna be, we'll be okay.
That 11-page PowerPoint that you guys sent over, is that reflective of the trend that dips below the 20%?
That's correct.
And it's mostly coming from our IT?
So there
And the
are
fluctuation?
there are two things in that significant decrease. There's another PERS increase
Yeah,
that year.
there you go.
So there's another PERS increase, and then I also put in the expected IT expense, which is close to 140,000 that year. So that 140,000 plus another probably 300,000 for PERS, that's why it takes that big dip. But I think it's important that we know we are going to have these IT costs, and we need to be aware that it's going to be there.
Those IT costs, that 140,000, is that for a specific?
It's server and computers.
Okay. So it's my understanding that the operating system that you guys utilize for your accounting, that is based on, it's a manufacturing model? Is that what I understood?
Not any longer.
Not any longer, so
We've
you did replace
transferred-
that?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're this close to wrapping it up. I mean, it is a module made by the same company, but it's meant for fund balance organizations, nonprofits, and local governments. So, and I think she was thrown into that as the new finance director and picked it up. And when we first started, she was like, "What are you doing to me?" But I think as she and her staff have dug in and implemented it, she actually, correct me if I'm wrong, tell that it actually is a good database and you're figuring out how to use it.
Once we
and
figure it out, yeah.
So, we're getting there.
So Brad, you've cut your, oh, I'm sorry.
I had a quick question about the software subscriptions increase, and maybe it was covered earlier and I missed it. 6216, looks like it's going up by $40,000. Do you know?
So
can
a
you
couple,
describe that?
yeah, a couple quick things. So the big one, we were informed 6 months ago or so that the product that we use to manage our service desk, so our service tickets, it manages all our assets within IT, a pretty key piece of software for us. The vendor, HP, a large vendor, is not supporting that product anymore. And that product, unfortunately, is a hosted product. So when they stop selling it, stop servicing it, we have nothing. We can't even run an old version of the software. We can't do anything. So we're forced to go find something else. So $15,000 of that is a replacement of that product. And then there's some miscellaneous, we had some security purchases this year that resulted in some maintenance cost increases. Of about $7,000 is what we're estimating. We haven't purchased all of those yet. And then just some miscellaneous, another software purchase that we made a year ago that resulted in that. I'd purchased some firewalls last year. That maintenance bill did not show up on last year's software subscription services. It is showing up on this year, so those are the main ones.
But the projected looks like it's exactly the same for adopted budget this year. Are you saying that some of the funds?
The 15,000 will show up next year.
Right, that was unforeseen, I got
Right.
that, but you're talking about the firewall purchases that,
So I'll have to look at my other one. The firewall actually may have shown up last year, but we have $7,000 in security maintenance for purchases we're making this year. So that maintenance won't show up. We had some change management software, other security-related software that showed up this fiscal year that we purchased. It's a $4,000 increase that'll show up next year. We had an increase in licensing needs on our monitoring software. I don't remember what the last year's amount was, but I believe it's an increase of about $2,000 or $3,000 total increase. The Microsoft Office 365, it increased in $9,000, but it's taking the place of a couple other products that we're not buying because we increased the licensing levels there. We also had to add a few more users that we didn't have years prior. I mean, I can detail it out and send it to you in an email if you'd like to show you where all
so
those
there's
increases
a
are.
list of, say, a dozen or so pieces of software that have increased costs in supportability since last year.
I wouldn't even say it was a dozen, half a dozen probably. And like I said, I can send an email to the group with those exact increases.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it, thank you.
So Brad, just, because there may be interest, your training budget got cut pretty significantly.
By 120 hours.
Yeah, the nice thing about IT training is, well, the bad thing about IT training is that it is very expensive. I mean, a week of IT training can be $3,000 to $5,000 for one person. So it's never realistic that we can do as much training as we would like. And quite honestly, IT trends move so fast, but we don't follow those trends at that same speed. So we can always be a couple layers back, I guess, from the cutting edge, so to speak. So, and there's a lot of opportunities for us online. And quite honestly, we have so much work in the area of security that we'd like to kind of work on and internal projects that I think we got more than enough to do with just maintaining what we currently have and getting the training through other resources. I'm not concerned about it. If it's if we're at the same place next year or the year after and we're not doing training, that's when I'll get concerned. But we did a fair amount of training this past year.
Brad, tell us about 6308, the increases there. What's driving that?
Internet
access.
Is it more users, more?
Oh, sorry. The big cost there is we're joining, the acronym is BUG, the Broadband Users Group. It is a coalition of all the Washington County cities that have joined together. Their networks all connect, and they share services across those. In the 16 years that I've been here, we've never been a part of that. We are going to be a part of it this year. That gives us access to some key resources that we don't have. The jail database is one of them. Gives us access to a shared GIS database that we don't have access to. It actually gives us a backup, a redundant connection for 911 dispatch, which is huge for us. We've had a couple small outages where that has gone down, and the guys are kind of dead when that happens. So that's what that increase has come from.
Is that the entire increase? Is that the entire cost to be part of BUG, or?
There's two parts of it. There is the connectivity piece, so to connect into that network, that's a Comcast connection, so there's a cost for that, and there's a fee that they charge us to be a part of their group, and that's about $6,000.
So is that expected to stay that high in future years then? That cost would remain the same, or is there one time?
You know, what's also in there is as an air card line item that we've already just recently went through an audit, and I suspect that number is gonna go down, so not by a huge amount, but there will be at least $12,000 that we'll always have to pay.
So this portion of your budget, you also control the broadband, and that's a separate enterprise fund. What we're apportioning here are costs that we believe are associated strictly with the general fund, right?
Absolutely.
And so how many FTEs do we have here?
I don't think I have that number.
Pulling it up.
You do, you have it.
4.2 are funded through this.
And then you're gonna, are you doing your broadband right next to this, or are we he's
That'll be
coming back
later.
to us?
He'll come back probably on night 2 at the earliest. for
Okay, so the school district pays, and this might be, because we have zero revenue on this part from the IT, right? There's no revenue this is just strictly straight cost for our IT, what we're estimating and prorating and putting over there. So the revenue, like the school broaddistrict pays us, that's gonna be in your broadband budget, or does it come to the general fund in the franchise or whatever?
So all broadband derived revenue comes to the broadband utility, and it stays in that fund, for utility expenses.
So the school district payment is gonna be in your broadband fund? Okay.
Any other questions on anything for IT's budget?
And the last question, are these expenses rated between broadband and?
No, they're two separate budgets, so anything that's broadband specific is charged to broadband. Anything that's general fund is, the only thing that kind of goes between the two is the people, right? So I work some of my time out of broadband, and so does the network engineer.
Okay, and then, so this might be a question for later, but it's also, to me, part of this. When Brad has expenses that we could consider as one-time, or they're not reoccurring expenses, and we have that one-time fund that we're talking about, or like the senior center that we talked about, that there was like about 60,000 difference between the revenue that came in versus whatever that one-time expense, or that was bringing everything out of whack. Do we have a criteria or a way that we determine who is eligible, or what expenses, or I won't say expenses, what costs are eligible for that one time? And does anything, because we're almost $1 million that Brad controls for the general fund to make sure that we're IT sufficient. So,
So there are very strict actual guidelines as to what can go into each fund. It's the same as for like a water utility, where the water utility can't pay for general administration unless it's its fair share. And so the same thing applies to IT. The specific IT expenses that relate to the functioning of the broadband utility. So say they put in some fiber that is for their customers, that needs to be charged to the utility. But if they are doing some work on software or security that benefits all of the city employees and our computers, that cannot be charged to broadband because it wouldn't be fair to the customers of the broadband utility. So just in the same way as water can't pay for a water feature because it truly should be paid for from parks, for example. It's the same concept where the people paying the charges have to be benefiting directly from that cost. So that's how that
okay,
that
so
decision is
like the
made.
example of 911, the backup that we talk about through Bug, that doesn't go in the police department
So,
budget?
so the general fund, IT is one of those that benefits everyone. And so if the IT cost is specific to a department, it will go into that department. If it benefits the entire city, then it goes into IT. And we've started sorting those out. In the past, it's been a little muddled. This year, I've taken a lot of the requests and I've changed the departments that were requesting them to make sure that they were specific to those departments. But we're just starting into that and to making sure that we get a specific procedure and policy in place for those costs.
And I'm with Joe, you can't leave here. This is what we've been trying to move toward, is, putting them
I
in the
second
right
that.
baskets.
All third or fourth.
Thank you very much.
So Brad, I do have a question about the BUG participation.
Yeah.
If this is for the general fund, so that the internet services that are provided to and within the city for its operation, are we gonna see something similar in parallel for the broadband enterprise to join that group also?
So potentially there's an opportunity for the broadband utility to sell services to that group. And I think at that point, we would have to have that discussion about who should pay this now, who's really benefiting them maybe the most from it. So that hasn't been discussed yet. I mean, really, it's only internal staff are gonna consume this service, so, but potentially, yeah, if that's what you're asking.
So the BUG participation you're doing is just benefiting the inside city services. It's not a benefit that is then part of the broadband utility that we're going out to our customers. Okay.
And so much so that the IGA that gets signed with that is pretty specific, that it is for the city of Sherwood. It doesn't include Sherwood Broadband, so.
For its commercial customers, exactly.
Absolutely,
Okay, thank you, sir.
absolutely, yeah.
Okay. If there's nothing else, thank you, Brad. Human Resources, I'm gonna have Tom, the Assistant City Manager, who this is within his portfolio, talk about the HR budget.
Well, I guess we've kind of been taking questions of line items, but one I'll just point out in particular, because it's a significant change, an increase, is miscellaneous purchase services, item 6298. And that is two things. One is we haven't been accurately tracking our flex account that we have for employees for insurance. That's about $2,000 a year. So we put that in the budget for this year. And the other larger one is actually $12,000 for a program called NeoGov. And this is one of the very few one-time expenses as well as ongoing expenses that's been included in the budget. And NeoGov is a cloud version of a software that most of the local jurisdictions in the region are now using, and it's really very specific to advertising and for jobs and for employment opportunities. So currently, we are doing everything manually. That means scanning every single application that we get in, printing those out for the hiring managers to go through, as well as we don't really have anything other than spreadsheets to track where employees are in the process, as well as pushing out information. NeoGov is what a lot of cities use. So once you set up a user account, you can basically go online, submit your application, submit all your attached materials and everything else, and then we can distribute that to hiring managers electronically, so they don't need to print things out. We keep records electronically, and it allows us to manage the system all the way through the process. It's a very powerful tool. You can actually have it, score applications, or have the manager score applications online. You can have them do their scoring of the interviews online and everything else. I think that's a little bit more than most people do, but you certainly can for no extra cost. It's all included. So it has a $7,000 cost to get the product set up, and then about a $5,000 cost year over year. But we figure we're spending almost a quarter of our HR analyst time just managing applications. We get somewhere between 600 and 800 applications a year for different positions, and we're trying to save time, save money, and be more efficient. So that's that one. Just a couple of other
Tom, what's the name of that?
NeoGov.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, NeoGov.
Yeah,
G-O-V.
NEO-GOV,
Okay.
and it's
Okay.
specifically meant for government agencies, and you can go look it up, and you'll see that
It's a very good product.
Westland, Tigard.
It's been
yeah.
around for a good decade.
That was the one mentioned in the memo.
Yeah,
That's
that's one of the three that I chose to propose to fund. There's a long list that I said no to, but that's one that I think will be a small investment, but I think it'll pay dividends and allow our HR department to be doing other things versus shuffling paper.
Scanning.
It's probably years overdue, I would imagine, at this point.
It is, but, we honestly, it's just really been the last 3 years where we've seen a huge increase in the number of applications we've been receiving. The number of applications we receive per job is down this year, but we have more jobs that we're advertising just because of turnover and the economy and growing and everything. So we anticipate that it's going to be a fairly large task, even in the next 3 or 4 years, to manage if we don't get something. Go ahead.
What's driving the liability insurance so high?
So liability, I was actually just going to get into that. So the increases from CIS for this year are, for liability is 3.8%. So it's really mostly being driven by the increase that our insurance provider is requiring. Property insurance actually is going down a little bit this year, about 7%. But we did an audit last year of our different buildings and facilities that we did. So as we did that audit, we realized that we actually had some things that weren't included that should have been, and some higher costs on some facilities, and we were actually protecting. So the numbers went up, and then the amount that our insurance provider is charging is less. So it's going down a little bit, but not as much as it would have if it was the same coverage that we're getting before. And then auto physical damage is up about 6.5% this next year from our insurance provider. And we tend to see, somewhere between 5 and 10% in all these categories every year as the pool, which almost every local government is in, tends to get more risky, and there's just more payouts that our insurance carrier is providing.
Tom, can you, 6198, there's no money in that line item. Can you talk about that briefly?
So 6198, other professional and technical services. I'd have to look that up. I don't have it.
So that was
18,000
the
is the
compensation
comp study, right?
study?
Yeah, that was a compensation study that we projected for this year. It actually ended up being more expensive than we thought, but obviously that's a 1 year deal. We plan to have that done before July 1st, so that will be hit off. And we don't have anything projected for next year in that category.
And is that also 6498?
That's NEOGA.
6498, $10,000
$10,000 that went away.
for other operating materials and supplies. Let me look up what that was for this year.
That's the stairs in the city hall?
Oh, that's right.
Ah,
Yeah, so we have a project that we get monies from our insurance provider to do safety-related projects that we had planned on, and we still plan on doing a project out here in the front entrance on those stairs by adding some handrails. So that was what that money was for last year.
the estimate that we've gotten, at least internally from Public Works, was closer to $17,000. So we have 10,000 in the budget, so we've got to figure out what we're going to do in that area.
Why is it under human resources?
Just because it's risk management. Human resources covers risk management as well, so.
So are we gonna have that completed before July 1st?
We're gonna do something. We haven't figured out exactly what. $17,000 we think is a little more, and I think we can scale that back and get something else done, so.
When you talk about the compensation study, what was that? Was that the salary study that we've talked about?
Yeah, so compensation study is currently in progress, and it's a total compensation study, so it not only includes salaries, but one thing that we have not done for many years is to take a comprehensive look at the entire city and compared ourselves with other cities in the area. I think it was roughly 2004, 2005, last time we did a comprehensive one. And so it's way overdue as far as, taking a look at job descriptions, what people are doing, comparing them to other cities, and how we are compensating across our organization relative to other cities. And so we have undertaken that process. It's kind of an interactive process. Right now, our consultant is finishing up collecting all the data from our surrounding cities that we decided were our comparables. And they are going to be coming back towards the end of this month and actually having meetings with individual employee groups. A part of that is actually we send out questionnaires to all the different job classifications to make sure that employees have the opportunity to state what they're actually doing in their job, to make sure that when we look at surrounding jurisdictions, job descriptions, that we're comparing apples to apples, and that we make sure that someone isn't in a job classification, they're doing something completely different, and that isn't captured. So it's pretty comprehensive, and that's why we hired a consultant to help us with that. They're out of Indiana, and they are going to be here a couple more times. Ultimately, that will end up coming into a report, and the challenge will be to figure out how do we implement that over the next few years. So,
We don't know because we don't know. When you look at all the different positions, there's going to be some that are we're not competitive, and there'll be a cost to that. And that'll be a discussion that I will have, first internally with my team, but ultimately coming to the council and say, look, this is where we are. How do we address this? And that could be a $50,000 amount. That could be $150,000. It could be $300,000. I just don't know what it is until you actually complete it. But I think there are some positions that are going to be below market. But I think because it's been so long since we've done this, I was a proponent that we do a comprehensive. We look at every position and how are we doing in the marketplace, because we do compete.
Couldn't we pick for our comparables?
let's see, I had that list here earlier today, but I don't have it, but I can certainly give it to you. It's a little challenging because we're on the smaller side of cities in the metropolitan region. But if you want, I will send out the list to you to see.
That'd be great.
Yeah, we can send the list out,
Be happy to.
because that's an important component to this.
Yeah.
So,
One of the things what you're talking about is that the police department, we're having trouble because of the competition. I mean, that's what the police department was saying to us. They were in trouble filling the positions because of the competition.
So we'll see where we are and then see how large or small that issue is. And then I'll present a plan to the council for implementation. So I've seen other cities tackle this, and the larger the number sometimes is, it's a phased-in approach. You don't take it all at once, but there's a phase to get to where you want to be. So it'll be very important information that
Yeah,
we'll get back.
with as volatile as the benefit part of the package is for the employees, that I can't imagine it's gonna be anything other than phased.
Yeah, and the nice thing about the way we're doing this is it does look at total compensation, so it takes into account health insurance, it takes into account life insurance, it takes into account PERS costs, it takes into account all those different components. So it's a big task, and when you're looking at, I think we're looking at 7 or 8 different cities, every job description, and then every component of compensation. There's a lot of data that ends up getting analyzed and to make sure that we understand where we are in our marketplace.
Does it get down to the detail of, like, in our health example, we take care of 90%? Does it get down to the detail with our comparative cities, if they do 50% or they do 25, or whatever that is?
It does.
So, good.
It does on a dollar basis. It also does on a percentage basis as well, as more as a roll-up. I think 90%, somewhere, 90% is pretty comparable to what our surrounding jurisdictions are. So I think we'll find that that
Of
particular
the
item.
other cities that you have them looking at, right? You directed the Indiana group
Right.
to look at 8 cities, or what,
Right.
is it 8?
I think it's 8 or 9, so we'll get you the list. But it's pretty common to be in that 90% range, 90, 92, 88. It's a pretty tight group. So I don't think you'll see any surprises in the healthcare costs.
No, that was just an example.
Sure.
Of just making sure, apples to apples.
I have a question, and it's not on the numbers, but I'm noticing on page 50 of the budget detail for human resources that your annual cost of worker compensation claims goes from a projected in 16-17 of 300 to 1,000.
Yeah,
Wow.
and honestly, 1,000 is great. So, but we have to be realistic. We have had some extraordinarily great years of worker comp and accidents, and so it's projected, but we also need to be realistic and say, okay, well, chances are we're not going to be down in those ranges. We hope we are, but we also need to be.
Does the city have a DART score for days away restricted time?
I don't think we've calculated that in particular. We certainly do with the state requirement of posting, the different accidents we have and everything. I'm not familiar with the DART score, but our,
Is that DART?
Yeah. Days away restricted time.
I can tell you it's very low, just based on our history, so.
And FTE and HR?
1.1.
What's the
What's the point?
miscellaneous revenue? Where's that?
Yeah, what's the,
That's, do you want to take it, Tom?
Go ahead.
It's, each year we get a rebate back from SAFE, and the amount can vary greatly, because it's not dependent on us, it's dependent on SAFE and how much, and then they basically spread it out among everyone. The leftover sort of, yeah, it's like a
Dividends.
dividend. So that's what that is. And our goal is to put that into a separate reserved bucket so that it can pay the claims that we get. If we have a year where we have higher claims, then that money would go towards that so that it would be aligned.
And how did you come up with the 15,000? Is that?
It's a guess, to be honest with you. The numbers have been coming down from SAFE here recently. They also cut their rates this year, so we're expecting it to be a little less. But as Katie said, one of the challenges that we'll have claims, whether it's an auto claim or a claim, and we don't know which, department it's going to come from. And so, let's say somebody, a police car runs into a pole or something, you know, then we're going to their department and charging them, and it's not in their budget, it's not in our budget. So we're trying to buffer that by trying to get that under human resources and risk management.
Can you give a different example?
Well, if someone hadn't run into a pole, I would. But,
So is the revenue also decreasing because we have an increasing amount of claims? If it's coming, it's not, it's just.
no, it's not at all. Our experience modification rating is extremely high, and it's not changing because of the number
Okay.
of claims.
Good.
It's just simply that this is something that they sit down and they determine each year. And I went a little lower this year because SAFE, in the past 5 years, hasn't cut their rates, but they cut their rates this year. And my concern is there's just not going to be as much available as extra earnings because they've kind of made some adjustments internally. And it could be zero. I mean, we have to be, you know, reality. They determine how much they're going to distribute of the excess money they've taken in, but
And that was the case
statewide.
In 14-15, we got nothing, right? If I'm reading that correctly.
And that's just strictly excess earnings from SAFE, that we're getting rebates.
That's right.
That's the only.
Right, they have,
Okay.
they have a risk pool, and they assume what they're going to expend, but across the entire SAFE organization, which is massive, the amount they paid out is just significantly less than they've collected, so they give it back in a rebate.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. That is a lot of great information. For the sake of time, though, unless anyone has any really specific questions, I feel like we should move on to finance.
Okay, Katie, your department.
So for finance, the biggest thing that you will see is the changes in the current year projections have to do with there being an interim director for a while. So salaries have kind of been different over time. Services, we've contracted out for the interim director, so you see an increase in those professional services. And then the software implementation that we love so dearly, that will be done. So the contract, we're going to extend it, have it finished June 30th, and then the plan is to just use the consultant if we need to, you know, for spot checks and things like that. Brenda, who is here in the audience, has been working very hard to figure out the back end of the system. She's been doing our settings, the programming, figuring out the tables, all of that. So that should completely reduce that level. So you'll see that the overall cost in finance is going down. Our projection for this year is 622,000, and it's going down to 551. And that's almost exclusively because we won't be doing the software implementation next year. Other than that, we did cut travel. So the question, what did we cut? Instead of having, there are two conferences. There's a fall conference and a spring conference where, in general, the accountants and the finance director attend these conferences. They're extremely beneficial. It's the OGFOA, Oregon Government Finance Officers Association. And that's where we hear about changes in reporting requirements. They also do classes for basic and intermediate governmental accounting. It's really beneficial. So we're going to do one instead of two of them. And then we're going to reduce the number of people that go. So those are the main changes in training for finance.
And just so the public knows, under auditing services, we are required to audit every year, correct?
We are required.
And did we in fact, I know there was an email about this, but did we actually award our RFP contract?
We have an intent to award because it hasn't gone by council yet.
Okay.
So we have an intent to award. The RFP, it did come within budget. The proposal we received back, and then that will be at the next council meeting that will be awarded.
And that intent, just for the citizen members and the public, is to the same firm that the city has used, TKW. We did get two other very strong applications or proposals, but staff is recommending that we stick with TKW. And it would be a 3-year contract with the opportunity for two one-year extensions.
Good.
Thank you very much.
And the FTEs on that is,
Not enough? No, sorry.
That's a given, but, 4.22.
and the auditing services that have gone up from the couple years ago, 45, now is it just the cost for the auditing services, the $15,000 extra is just extra?
So they
Or are
have-
they doing more work?
Both. So there's a component that has to do with the increased, they have built-in increases based on inflation, but they have also had to expand some of their work, in part due to our internal controls, in part due to the changing of finance directors. They have to do additional testing beyond what we would hope. So my hope is that within a couple years, so this year and next year will still be the higher level. If we get to a point where our internal controls are strong enough and we're able to bring that down, then that could go down.
But not like half
Not-
or anything?
No, not in half.
Okay. Court is also a department within Katie's portfolio, so.
So court is the one general fund department that brings in more than it spends. And it's also the department where we reduced by an FTE, which staff is feeling a little tight already. So we may need to make some adjustments as far as hours of customer service available. I'm not sure how long they can go with just two people being open all the hours that they are. So that's something that will need to be considered since we reduced down from 3 people to 2 people in court. The position became vacant, and as you know, with all of the increased amounts, that we preferred not to cut somebody, an actual person. So with a vacant position, the decision was made to freeze the hiring for that position for right now. So that's where you'll see the savings in the personnel services. And we also cut almost all of the training for court. A lot of the training can be done online. So they've identified trainings that they can take online. They've cut out conferences as opposed to trainings, so that they're still getting what's required for their certifications, but not going out of state or out.
The only question I have with this department is, in the event that the Budget Committee wishes to see that staff position filled, can you speak a little bit about, to the public, and refresh our memories, how we go about doing that? Because obviously, we would need to take that money from somewhere else.
So as far as right, we would have to take the money from somewhere else. And that, if the position was within the same division, there would not be a change actually to the proposed budget, because that, if it's within the same division, again, that level of authority is higher. So it wouldn't change the overall adoption. But a motion can be made to make a change if there should be a need to another division. But I'd like Joe to speak to
So how much is
personnel
that, what's the
differences.
value of that position? Not the value.
It's
but
about
the
$70,000
cost.
with,
70,000. So we'd have to cut 70,000 somewhere else to stay balanced.
Yeah, but where could we do that?
That's
is
with all the
question.
related charges, the health insurance.
with all, right, correct.
Well, I would ask for strong suggestions from you where you want to see it cut.
Right,
Versus just say,
we need to.
add this back in and
Figure it
figure it out.
Okay.
And
so
I'd
I
like to
think
remind you
that's
that would
something we
have to
should
be
think about.
ongoing expenses. This
Right.
could not be from one time because
Right,
it is an
right.
ongoing personnel.
Which is honestly not a bad exercise for you folks to go through as an exercise. I think you'll learn or be reinforced that it's not necessarily an easy thing to do.
No, and the reason I bring it up is because, as you pointed out, this department is a moneymaker for the city. And I'm just reminding you of that.
So one of the things whenever a position becomes vacant, we always do the, okay, opportunities are presented by this vacancy. Do we just fill it the same way because the needs are the same? Do we do something different? Do we modify the position? And when this position became vacant, we were early in the budget process and we kind of knew it was going to be a tough budget to balance. And I went to Katie and her team and said, you know, actually, I think you guys
I
were the
approached
ones
you.
that suggested, hey, we might be able to do without this position. There may be some service issues related to that, but I think it's worth trying. And because I believe the court administrator said we used to have only 2 positions.
Correct.
So we've been doing it actually for close to 2 months now.
About 2 months.
But it was always like, well, let's see how it goes, and if we have to make an adjustment, we might have to go back and make an adjustment to bring it back. So that's kind of the evolution of this. It wasn't like, there was no hiring freeze in a sense, because there's been other positions that have opened up that we continue to advertise, so.
Do you know off the top of your head what the current open hours are for the court?
It is 8 to 4:30 Monday through Thursday and noon to 4:30 on Friday.
So one of the things we've talked internally is, could we reduce the court hours a little bit? And staff it with 2 people without having a significant decrease in terms of service levels. I mean, there'd be an impact because we wouldn't be open as much, so.
And we've also started cross-training. Jean will be starting cross-training in the courtroom itself. Tina has been covering a lot of other duties, so she's been covering some of finances duties to free up Jean to do some of the court duties. She's also become lead certified so that she can back up court duties. And Patty, the receptionist, has also taken on the administrative court duties. So there's been a lot of shuffling. We're moving things around. We're, reviewing who's doing what to try to accommodate.
Are
So-
there any intern options or anything of that nature for this role, or is that not applicable to?
I wouldn't.
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah, no.
Well, and the folks in the court have lead certification and have access to a lot of information that you just wouldn't want to give someone off the street, things like that, so.
I have one quick question. On the red light cameras income, are we cognizant and aware and not anticipating any disruption in service for the anticipated Tualatin and Sherwood Road improvements?
We are aware, but we don't anticipate that it will affect this fiscal year.
Okay,
So we're
so the
looking
following.
forward. We believe it will be
Yeah.
the following year, and we're
Okay.
already discussing options to.
Correct.
Got it.
Depending on how that construction takes place and how long those cameras are inactive, because the
Right.
road is being redone, there could be a significant decrease in revenue.
Yeah.
Because tickets are down, because the cameras are not functioning.
And
So it's a
Do-
great question.
Do we have an accounting of the time that we have not had the 2 full-time employees at the court of lost revenues? If any?
We've had any lost revenues.
Since the position's been open?
Correct, since we have not filled the position that is open.
We have not had any decrease in revenues at
Okay.
all. I just have some stressed employees.
Yeah.
Because they
And
haven't
we-
changed the hours.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I check in with them once a week.
Yeah.
How are you doing? How are you feeling? Do you need anything? And they assure me that they can hang in there until June and hope that we will discuss the hours.
Okay.
That is the latest
Okay.
that they have said.
Okay.
And we've had no customer complaints that I'm aware of, and a decline in,
Service, yeah.
service in terms of cranky employees, because they're stretched.
No, they're doing very well.
They're working really hard, but
Okay.
we are very cognizant that they're being stretched, so.
What's the FTE in this department?
It's actually up to a different place. Oh. 3.1, I apologize. Because we have those other people pitching it.
So court, that's the last department within the administration division, so that may be a good stopping point, because you have a public hearing on state shared revenue, you still have to open, and you may have some folks that want to have public comment, so.
Okay.
So while you're getting all that together, what we'll pick up next week in the general fund, we'll pick up with community development, which is planning, building, and engineering. And just continue to go through each department, so.
So at this point, we will move forward to the public hearing on state shared revenue. Okay. The purpose of this hearing is to provide the public with an opportunity to submit testimony concerning the possible uses of state revenue shared funds for fiscal year 2017-18. The order of business we will follow in conducting this hearing will be receive public testimony, questions from the committee. The hearing will then be closed and no further testimony will be received. Discussion by the committee. Any interested person may present testimony. If you have not already done so, if you wish to speak, please fill out one of the testimony forms and submit them to the finance administrative assistant. At this point, I would just like to remind anyone testifying to please limit your testimony to 4 minutes. And I believe the only person interested in speaking is Mr. Eugene Stewart.
Yes, Eugene Stewart. Same question as I think I had last year, is that what are the requirements on spending that money? Are the citizens supposed to come forward with projects to spend it on? Also, I believe that are required to tell the public where you're spending the money specifically. And I don't know if for sure, I don't know if part of this revenue sharing is from OLCC. That statute does specifically require that the public be told where that money is being spent. It seems like it would be nice, maybe not this year, but in future years, taking a percentage of that, opening it up and let the public come forward with small projects, maybe projects that could be done with volunteer help, but they need capital to complete the budget, whether it's on maintaining trails, maybe building new trails, cleaning up spaces, whatever the public may think needs to be done, so that maybe with spending a little money, you get a lot more done if you can especially funnel it towards volunteer projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. And at this point, we will, I'm sorry, I was not expecting to be the chair this evening, not very prepared. I will open public comment. Oh, did you want to?
I was just gonna, can we ask Mr. Stewart if he has any suggestions for
Well,
small
this isn't a
projects?
conversational.
No, I know it's not conversational.
Yeah. So, we can have a discussion. The committee?
Oh, I was just looking, if he brought up the idea, so usually when somebody has an idea like that, they've got a project. I just wondered.
I think it would be best to maybe have that off discussion at a later point. It's just because of the sake of time.
So at this point, you would close the hearing
Okay.
and then ask the committee if they have any discussion.
Okay. So at this point, because there is no further submissions for testimony, I will close the hearing, and we can begin a discussion if the Budget Committee so wishes.
So I think it'd be maybe just a good starting point to revisit what are state shared revenues, and where they are in the budget. I believe if you look at page 1, under intergovernmental, there's actually a line item that 4210 says state revenue sharing.
So there are two different types of state revenue sharing, which I'm learning since I'm new to Oregon. So we have the overall state revenue sharing, which is each city gets a portion, and then we have the per capita revenue sharing. So the line that you see in here, which is state revenue sharing, is that overall lump sum. And then you also have the cigarette tax, the liquor tax. Those are also shared state revenues. So those are part of those that are covered by that hearing. There are requirements to receive those revenues in things that the city has to be doing, and the city council will certify that we do those within the city. You have to have at least 4. You have to have either police protection or fire protection or both. Street construction, maintenance, sewers,
Planning.
storm, planning is one of them, one or more utility services. So the city has to offer at least 4 of these items to be eligible for these state shared revenues. As far as the city of Sherwood is concerned, this is allowed to be used in the general fund for all purposes. And it is mainly used to support our police services, in addition to the property taxes. We don't specifically outline it as a separate revenue source and track specific expenditures against it because of the way it is allowed to be used and the small amount it is compared to our property taxes.
Katie, where is that on the budget? What page are we on?
So if you look at the overall general fund, it's on page 1 under intergovernmental. Most of those are found in the non-departmental department, as we say, if you wanted to, because they benefit the city
The
as a
line
whole.
item detail tab. Page 1, right there.
141, 4210.
Okay, and you said under 4210?
That's one of the line items.
Okay.
4210, 4212, 4213. Those are state shared revenues.
So that's about almost 600,000.
4229 is not part of that.
No, 4229 is not part of that.
My experience in other jurisdictions is most jurisdictions use it for general fund. Now, Beaverton, I remember in Beaverton, and I believe they still do this, is they have made a decision years ago to take their state shared revenues and spend them on a lot of social service programs. Kind of their sin taxes, cigarette, liquor, things like that. So we're gonna support social service programs that help people. That was the Beaverton philosophy. That's pretty unique, though. Most jurisdictions use it for just general funds.
So by law, we can have them in the general fund and not have to line item detail specifics where we're gonna send them.
There is also a portion that is in the street fund, and the reason it's in the street fund is because we use it for streets only. So that's the portion that comes from the motor vehicle fuel taxes and those are placed directly into the street fund, and we'll get to the street fund at a later date, but they do fall under that state shared revenue as well. But they're segregated from the time they come in.
What's that number? We're at 600 with those other 3.
Sorry, too many pages. That is 1.1 million, the apportionment of vehicle taxes.
And that's in street ops.
That's in
which
street
is
ops.
Fund 18.
That's dedicated solely to streets.
What page is that on?
It's 13 of 17, but it's because it's towards the end and it's in a separate.
But if you go to that page, you'll see that's the primary source of intergovernmental revenue in that fund. It's an important source, actually.
So I'm actually interested in learning a little bit more about how we could potentially allocate state shared revenue to more specific social type events within the city. And I'm really curious about how Beaverton has chosen to do that, given you mentioned Beaverton did that. And while I hear you say that that's pretty unique, I'm interested in learning a little bit more about that. How does everyone else feel about that?
I'm not sure the value though, because, I mean, we've chosen what to spend the money on. If we further restrict ourselves that this dollar can only go to that and that dollar can only go to that, it's gonna kind of tie our hands to some extent. So I'm not sure the value of that.
Isn't that council? Is that?
I would say that's more of a council policy, and that would be a significant change. If you took $600,000 of our revenue and said, we're gonna now spend it on social
1.7.
services.
Well, and I don't know.
You're gonna have to
that's
cut.
gonna be the whole amount.
Yeah, you're gonna have to cut, again, you're gonna have to cut an equal amount from
Somewhere else.
somewhere else.
But we're also seeing our homeless population go up, we're seeing our homeless children population going up,
So-
we're seeing hunger.
We can still spend money on those things, but we don't necessarily have to tie this dollar to that
Correct.
program. And
Right.
so you can put those into the general, take that money out of the general fund, you're putting it into the general fund here without having to tick and tie every dollar to every program.
That makes sense.
This
And-
money this year is already included in other items.
We already spent it.
I would assume this would be
I
for a
don't
future
think she
year.
meant in this.
No,
For the
I'm
future.
just, your comment piqued my curiosity. I'm not suggesting that we make an immediate change.
And then you get into philosophical debates about cities versus counties. Because if you look at the county and the functions of county government, they primarily do social services.
Right.
And we're all county taxpayers. And for cities to start doing social services on top of the county, you start to get into why are both levels doing it? You know, if we're not doing enough, maybe the issue should be the county should be doing more. Because that's your primary function is social services. Social services is not a primary function of local government.
Well, and we also have to remember that we're not anywhere near the population of Beaverton.
Yeah,
Correct.
absolutely.
That's not even in our category.
Right, absolutely.
So we're comparing apples and
Yeah.
oranges.
And the other thing about Beaverton that people may not realize is they're one of the few cities that do not tax their full tax rate authority. They're a very healthy financially, so they don't tax the full amount. And there's a history and a reason for that. So they're a unique animal. They have a luxury that most cities don't have.
And not to belabor a point, they also have many more dollars of revenue coming in due to their large businesses.
There are nearly 100,000 people, so.
I could think of one in particular that will remain unnamed. Perhaps.
Well, and then
of
also, I don't
taxes.
know that the citizens on this committee know, but we support and are participating in ways to support the volunteer communities of the churches and other groups that have kind of come together recently. And I think one of you are going to those meetings where they're coordinating from various churches how they can support the homeless. You didn't hear that?
She's talking about the promise,
Family promise.
family promise meetings that some of us have gone
So
to.
I think I
Yeah.
We're just learning information.
Well, I
About the
think,
program.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
Andy's point, it really
Yeah.
summed it up really well. So I think that's valid.
Anything else about the program. That's what they're saying.
I only want to say one thing. You weren't talking about the city assuming services that we then, or were you just talking about us participating in like something else that was pre-existing and maybe
She
a?
just said she wanted to know more about the
No,
program.
Eugene made the comment about taking some of those funds from the state
Projects.
shared revenue and allocating those to specific projects and receiving public input on how funds received were allocated. And Andy's point is, I mean, absolutely on point, that we have the option to use those funds in that way already without changing the system that we already have in place.
Earmarking, without
Yes,
earmarking.
Without
perfect,
tying our
yeah.
hands.
Right, yeah. And so that makes perfect sense to me.
Okay.
Okay.
More information on this?
So, at this point, unless there's further discussion on shared revenue, I'd like to open up public comment on the 2017-18 Sherwood budget. Everyone okay with that? So for the public, if you'd like to speak and you haven't already filled out a form, please submit them to Jean. Please, again, limit your testimony to 4 minutes. I am going to ask and invite Steve Munsterman to talk to us.
Better get this right. Good evening. I just have one thing, concern I want to express or want you all to think about as you go through this budget committee process. But first, I want to say thank you to you all, staff, council, budget committee, for what you guys do. It's different levels of work and things, but you all have to do it to get it so it works. So it works pretty good. My concern is regarding deferral of maintenance items or tasks, almost like it's the last thing we worry about. And if your handout from tonight is Exhibit A, I think it's attached to your agenda. The third to last page, there's a page that refers to that. So my concern is a kind of an ongoing, there's not enough money, so we won't do this. And we all know there's not enough money. But I hope, I know Public Works put a whole lot of effort into developing that parks, facilities, fleet, asset management plan several years ago. I hope you've all read it and you're familiar with it. One thing is easily summarized, there are a very large number of tasks that are spread out over a number of years, and then as with any maintenance, they kind of just repeat themselves and it costs more. So it's kind of a, there's no end to it. And I look at this list here, and some of the things on this list, there's 15 items maybe. There's 6 of them, somewhere down there about crack sealing things. There's one about some paving. Well, there's 6 crack sealing things. I have no idea about these places. Some of them I've never been to. But if you don't do the crack sealing, then you have to repair the paving. Well, if we don't have $5,000 to repair the paving, we don't have $30,000 to do more work. So if we don't take care of things when it's cheap and easy, it just costs money later and they don't go away because we just keep building new things and making new things. Costs never go down, the city's liability goes up, you lose function. In a playground, you're gonna take parts of that playground off or close them off so people can't use them or whatever, things like that. So there's really no upside to it. There's only downsides, I guess, and that's something you'll all get to deal with. I guess I have a couple questions, and they are any of these items, or are there other items that were deferred from prior years? And then, is there a plan for next year? Because if we defer $300,000 this year, that means we probably need $600,000 or $1 million or some other number next year that, and if we didn't have it this year, we're probably not gonna have it next year. So that's just a couple questions, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Munsterman.
I don't know what I do with this thing.
Drop the mic.
Drop.
There we go.
And Eugene Stewart.
Eugene Stewart. I would echo what Steve said, is that when you defer maintenance, it jumps up and bites you in the behind. Much more you know. I have a client who happens to work for the school district, and he was talking to me about, he had 23 leaks in the roofs, and then when we got that wet weather, it jumped up to 50. And so he's running around trying to patch those as best he can without, because sometimes the way you do it, if you do it the wrong way, you make it worse. So those maintenance things, they need to be done when they're scheduled, not stretch it out 2 or 3 years afterwards. The other thing I'm a little concerned is that every year we see our property taxes go up and up and up. Back in the good old days, they usually went down when the bond was paid off. And I don't think we've seen that in the last 30 years. But the question is, why? And I think part of the problem is that we've grown as a residential community instead of a balanced community between business and residents. And until you figure out what that balance is and start working towards it, you're always going to be wrestling with this budget. You have an opportunity to plan to be like a Beaverton, to where you don't have all these headaches, as big as headaches anyway. So somehow, and I don't know if this is really a budget item, but somehow the city needs to start focusing their planning, whether it's in the planning department or gear up, to where we start enticing people. And maybe you need to look at, are development fees too high for businesses? What happens if you knock them down? How do you rebalance your budget so you can offer better breaks for business to come in and build now, and then allocate a percentage of the increased revenue from their coming in and building a new business, and taking that to help pay for the things that need to be paid for. So we need to start looking at how we do business a lot different. Question on where I would spend the money. I would spend it on the senior center. I need to give a plug for the senior center. We've been left, it was left high and dry. So there are a few things to be done. You have a wonderful person up there who runs it and helps run it now. You have a lot of wonderful volunteers up there. But don't forget, they're getting old. So anybody who wants to volunteer and help at the senior center, they'd be more than happy to have you come up and help out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eugene. I will now close the public comment. And Joe or Katie, do you have any closing comments for us this evening?
I'll start with one. I think both citizens that testified tonight raise really good concerns and ideas that I think we're going to talk about probably next week and probably in 2 weeks. The question about, did we defer things last year? No, this is the first year we've had in my proposed budget to defer those maintenance items. And I think we should have a discussion about, do we do some of those now and dip into our reserves? That's what you have reserves for. That's a worthwhile conversation. One of the things that is not in the budget, because I can't put revenue that I can't guarantee reasonably is going to come, but there are potential property sales that we have that will potentially have an infusion into the general fund. I don't know what that would be, but if and when that happens, those additional revenues could then pay for some of the things that we're deferring, maybe even next fiscal year if those sales happen. We're just not there yet. So So you could, I think, decide to dip into the reserves to do some of those as part of the budget process, or say, let's revisit in 3 months or 6 months, depending on how things turn out in terms of the sale. The main one, the community knows, we're in negotiations with the school district for a 20-acre piece of land that they're interested in buying. So we haven't come to terms yet. And we may not come to terms, but that's an unknown when we put this budget together. So I just wanted you to be thinking about that as well in terms of your decision related to that. Deferring things down the road, as both gentlemen said, is not the right thing to do. We have a good plan that identifies things that have to happen each year. And like I said, this is the first year, at least since I've been here, that we have not been able to do everything in the plan that we identified. And that is concerning. And that's $317,000 just from Craigslist. And that will go up the longer you defer that. So I think we should have a very healthy discussion about that and in terms of a decision. So the issue, and we'll talk next week when community development comes, we are seeing more commercial and potentially industrial growth. So being more of a balanced community, I think, is on the horizon if some of these things do actually come to fruition. A lot of them are on paper yet or going through, the development review process. They're not actually been built. But I think as long as we are largely a bedroom community, a residential community, it's going to be a tough budget every year. Our neighbors in Tualatin and Wilsonville, when you look at their budget, they're more balanced. They are healthier in terms of the revenues they bring in. A lot of that's because they have businesses and things like that. The downside is some people don't want the community to grow or change at all. So when businesses decide to come here, you get some pushback from some folks that, well, we don't want this type of commercial development in our backyard or this type of thing. So I think both gentlemen raised very good points tonight for you guys to ponder in the next week or so. So do you have anything else you want to offer?
I don't think so. Just make sure you look over the next departments in the general fund so you're ready when we hit the ground running next week.
So,
May I say something?
sure.
Exactly what you're talking about, Joe, and part of the reason why the community gets together with the elected officials is, like what we're proposing in this budget, there's $152,000 that we're proposing for increases for our staff this year, that if we said as a choice, let's just try to go straight on, and then that would cover half of the deficit of what we're talking about. That's just an example. I'm not saying one way or the other. And then, like the article that I sent over where Kate Brown, our governor, is telling everybody, hey, cities, you've got to sell your property to cover your PERS. So when you talk about a contemplated sale, we still have our ongoing liabilities that are going to be increasing, where it has direct impact on our staffing and what we have available. And like the Red Flex cameras, when that goes down for the time period it does as we redo that road, that's a bite. And that's something that we have to consider. You can't just say, hey, we usually get $1.1 million, $1.2 million from that, and we're not gonna have an impact. Of course we're gonna have an impact. So we have those things that are coming up. And I don't think anybody, wants to say, hey, you're not being fair to the employees, they're working themselves to death, anything like that. We're all making sacrifices, and, we're paying property taxes, we're doing, everybody's doing what they can, a lot of volunteers in this community. It's a combination of everybody working together, and we can't have sacred cows. We have to look, and we have to do what we have to do. We're at the edge of Metro, nobody's gonna help us. Tualatin's not gonna give us money. Wilsonville's not going to. We have to help ourselves. And if we have to work on stabilizing the difference between our residential and our business, we really have to look at it. We can't just say, hey, that's a good idea to think about it. You bring more business in the community, you can really get our community more healthy and not have that burden on all of those families. So that's a real problem and a real challenge and a real piece of the puzzle that we can do and we can work on. And it's not something that we say once a year and then we move on and we keep doing the same thing that we're doing. We can solve the puzzle if we keep looking at things. And I was a little bit stunned about the thing with the YMCA because that's a bit of money too that could cover that deficit in the form of revenue. And we're stuck. So whatever that problem is, that will be resolved. But there are ways to go and a lot of different creative ways to think about it. And that's why I say is you two as the top administrators and Katie as our finance person and all of the people underneath it that work for us, that's your job, making those, trying to work creatively for us. I think we just keep approaching it so all of us are working in a proactive way positively because we want long-term employees that have a history, that are working toward what Katie is, of really working down and getting our budget so it is meaningful. So I'm just saying, let's keep working on it. Let's not just automatically say, nope, we can't talk about this, we can't talk about this. Let's talk about it and see what we can do. Because we have enough money, millions and millions, a million here and a million there, it starts to add up. And it can solve problems or it can make you in the hole. But we're not gonna get away from the PERS problem. And I don't wanna keep beating that drum, but we're making a move on it. But we just need to keep going. And I'm like what Steve Munsterman said, thank you everybody for spending any time in this community. But a lot of people come to the community because it's a great place to live. And it's a great place to have our kids grow up and to interact with people. And I appreciate everybody here, I appreciate our staff, and I look forward to our continued budget discussions.
And before I adjourn the meeting, I would also like to just say thank you to all of you here for all of your hard work and willingness to collaborate on this budget going forward. Katie, you have done an exceptional job, and we all thank you very much. And at this point, I will adjourn the meeting, and we will be meeting again next Thursday right here at 6 o'clock. And I will be more prepared next week.